Here it is, folks. This video was a beast. Futurama is one of my absolute favorite TV series of all time, and while I definitely don't think the entire run was perfect, it's hard for me to overstate how much I love the series as a whole. It changed the way I looked at television and the possibilities therein. It even kind of helped me inspire my entire career path, to be honest. And it's one of the first series that I truly just obsessed over. I used to fall asleep watching my DVDs nearly every night. About a year ago, I did every BoJack episode ranked, and I teased that I'd do it for Futurama. I may have taken my sweet time, but I'm finally here to rank every single episode of Futurama, worst to best. Now, if this video is bringing you to my channel for the first time, welcome, and maybe consider sticking around to check out my other Futurama videos, of which there are many. Some focus on characters, story arcs, unanswered questions, and even 3 retrospectives about the 3 distinct eras of the series. And if you like those, maybe consider subscribing. If you're looking for Futurama timelines, go check out Screen Portal, run by the lovely folks at Simpsons Theory. These videos are seriously amazing. Check them out. I've also got a Patreon where you can see most of my videos early, and a podcast where I talk about adult animated series with my friend Toonrific Tariq. Alright, thanks for letting me ramble. You know, there are quite a few bald characters in Futurama. Farnsworth, Zoidberg, heck, even Zap Brannigan is wearing a hairpiece. It's a shame they didn't know about today's video sponsor, Keeps. Did you know that 2 out of 3 guys will experience hair loss by the time they're 35? As someone with pretty voluptuous hair, this fact actually scares me a lot. But luckily, Keeps offers clinically proven, research-backed treatments to stop hair loss and improve hair growth. With Keeps, you can get expert care without ever even visiting the doctor or pharmacy, all thanks to its doctor-recommended plans that are delivered straight to your door at around half the cost of the traditional pharmacy. Plus, their network of medical advisors and specialists are available 24/7 to help if you need it. Whether you want to prevent hair loss, stimulate more hair growth, or just take better care of the hair on your head, Keeps has you covered. Personally, I'm going to try out their natural thickening shampoo and conditioner system because I think my hair could use it. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/Johnny2Cellos or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/Johnny2Cellos. Now, if you're keeping track, there were 72 episodes in the original run of the series, 4 movies that make up season 5, and 52 episodes in the revival run of the show. That's a total of 128 episodes. But because I'm a completionist, I'm also going to include the 2003 Futurama video game, the cutscenes of which would later be recut into the Lost Adventure and released on the Beast with a Billion Backs DVD, and I'll also be including 2014's Simpsons episode, Simpsorama, bringing our total number of episodes to a nice round 130. Alright, starting off with the F tier. There are only a few here, and I'm not trying to rant about the episodes I hate most, so these might be a little bit shorter, but let's get into it. Number 130, Yo Lila Lila. Yep, this is my least favorite episode of Futurama ever, and not because it's particularly egregious in any way, simply because it is one of the least memorable and just wholly unremarkable episodes I can think of. The episode doesn't really make me laugh, and for whatever reason, they decided to parody Yo Gabba Gabba. Futurama's direct parodies tend to engage me much less than the episodes that are more homage than parody. I guess there's one line in the episode that makes me laugh. It's basically revealed that Leela creates this TV show simply by writing down what she sees this weird group of aliens do on another planet. So she's basically just been sharing their personal information without their permission.
You lied, like Doing did when he stole Garbly's pet pine cone?
You told them about that?
But otherwise, this has always been an episode that just bums me out. Number 129, the Futurama Holiday Spectacular. I do not really love that Futurama abandoned its What If machine format for anthology episodes after the original run, and it also feels like they started doing too many anthologies in the Comedy Central era, spitting out 4 new ones after only dropping 2 in the original run. And sadly, outside of Reincarnation, none of the new anthologies work very well for me. I guess it's fine to have a theme, but the Futurama Holiday Spectacular just did not do it for me. The show was just always good at their holiday-themed episodes previously, so I'm not entirely sure why they opted to use this as an anthology theme when they've delivered great traditional holiday eps. I do appreciate that they brought in Kwanzaa for his most substantial role ever, but overall, this episode did not do much for me. Number 128, Naturama. Another anthology. Surprise! Look, I guess I appreciate the idea of teaching us about interesting types of animals through a Futurama story, but this again was just kind of boring to me. with 3 stories focusing on salmon, the Pinta Island tortoise, and the elephant seal. I'm just not coming to Futurama to see my favorite characters transformed into animals in a non-canon story. It has very little sci-fi, and it's hard to engage in a story that has no real impact on the Futurama world at large. At least with the old What If episodes, we know that the characters are actively seeing these what if scenarios through the What If machines, but with these random themed anthologies, they're just so inconsequential. I wish I liked it more. Number 127, Attack of the Killer App. Alright, so I really dislike this episode. Over time, I've softened on the entire iPhone parody. At the time, I thought it was a little too topical, but they at least brought their own futuristic twist to the concept. But what I cannot forgive is this damn Susan Boyle plotline, as we learn that Leela has a singing boil named Susan. I've talked about this before, but Susan Boyle is a music sensation from the 2009 iteration of Britain's Got Talent. She shocked the judges and the world, and has now sold an absolutely incredible 19 million records worldwide. It's an awesome inspirational story, and they reduced it to a hacky singing Boyle joke in this episode. This one bums me out in a major way, and it also was only the 3rd episode of the revival era of Futurama, creating a lot of panic in the fan base that the show might be heading in a bad direction. Luckily, things got better after this episode, but man, I'm not a fan. Number 126, Ben-Hur. I've talked a lot about this one in other videos and on my podcast, Cartoons That Curse, but man, does this episode age poorly. And I know I'm gonna get a lot of comments disagreeing, but I don't really care. The episode is just transphobic. So much anti-trans fear-mongering claims that trans people are predators who have dishonest motivations for transitioning, and this episode fully feeds into that through Bender. Many people claim that this is in character for Bender himself, and I understand that, but the problem is that this is really the only trans representation in the show, and it's super negative. And while I really dislike the episode for these reasons, it does have a few funny aspects. It introduces Barbados Slim, a great character, and also gives us a ton of calculon, including an entire soap opera style wedding, which I at least enjoy conceptually. I just think the episode does more harm than good. Alright, now we're moving on to the D tier. Similarly, I don't want to drone on too long about how much I dislike these, so we'll try to cruise through them more quickly. Number 125, Saturday Morning Fun Pit. Yep, another anthology. This one gets more points because it's at least somewhat fun to see these Saturday morning cartoon style parodies, but I feel similarly to this as I do the last 2 anthologies. It's just not funny enough for me personally, and more importantly, not engaging enough through the fact that it has no impact or consequences in the Futurama world at large. It just feels like Futurama wasn't able to master these parodies in the same way that some of the Simpsons Treehouse of Horrors were capable of doing, or even the way the old What If episodes were. I'm not a huge fan. Number 124, The Butterjunk Effect. It was kind of weird to see Futurama do basically a steroids episode, but I'm not particularly opposed to the idea. Unfortunately, this one didn't really deliver and gets a little too weird in the wrong ways for my taste. Amy and Leela basically start taking this nectar so that they can participate in this weird winged fighting league. They try to showcase the effects of roid rage to different degrees, and eventually Fry turns into like this full-on butterfly thing. I don't know, this one just never holds my attention all that much. Number 123, 31st Century Fox. This is just another that I find a bit uninspired. Bender joins a hunting club to hunt foxes, much to Leela's chagrin, but when he discovers that the foxes are robots, he starts to protest the practice. It just feels like this general concept where Bender debates human versus robot life was already handled pretty well in Ghost in the Machines. It does have a great guest performance from Patrick Stewart though, and another classic funny Futurama acronym for an organization, Bender's Animal Robot Front, or BARF. But kind of unremarkable. Number 122, Newtopia. I see what they were trying to do with this episode, but the way they went about it I think just did more harm than good. The idea of the characters all switching genders to better understand the plight of their partners is kind of interesting on paper, but the setup just makes so many of these characters out to be kind of gross. The episode seriously explains that the Planet Express contracts have a clause that force the female employees to pose nude if requested, which just portrays all of the guys on the crew as pretty gross and super down for workplace harassment. The end of the episode where the gender-bent characters are then forced to pose nude to understand what it's like is somewhat funny on a visual level, but I just think the episode damages the integrity of the characters in its premise. I'm not a fan. Number 121, Raging Bender. Another Fighting League episode. This one just never did all that much for me. I like the idea of Bender not being privy to the fact that he's in a fixed fighting league, but I never really liked the whole gender bender angle. I think what works is the Leela subplot as she deals with her own Karate Kid history, but outside of that plotline and Leela's redemption, I don't like much about this one. I am very fond of this joke though.
Those morons, I said teaberry, not sandalwood!
Damn it, Bender! If you can't move sandalwood, you don't belong in this league!
Number 120, The Honking. I think this episode suffers from flying too far off the rails in the supernatural category as Bender becomes a werecar. They sort of do the whole vampire type of story like we see in The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror 4, tracking down the original vampire to free the rest from their vampirism, but overall the premise is just kind of too out there for me, not enough sci-fi. I do like their attempts to track down the original werecar though, especially when they meet Calculon and we learn some of his long-term history.
I was all of history's great acting robots. Acting Unit 0.8, Thespomat, David Duchovny.
Number 119, The Root of All Evil. This is the episode that introduces Dwight Conrad, Hermes' son, and I really like the dynamic Dwight brings to Hermes and Cupert, but overall, this episode has always been a bit of a dud for me. It was fun to see Hermes and Farnsworth in dad mode, which we also see in Bender Should Not Be Allowed on TV, but the whole paper delivery plotline wasn't particularly engaging, at least for me. Like, the idea of these kids taking over Planet Express is just a bit much even for this show, but I do appreciate the ending as Farnsworth and Hermes save their kids from their failure and subsequently get swallowed by the father of their bully, Mr. Huge Gelatinous Blob. Number 118, 2D Blacktop. This episode to me mostly succeeds in its premise, even if it's not particularly funny. Street racing is a fun concept to tackle, and I like that the professor uses science in his street racing. The dimensional drift is pretty cool. Unfortunately, the rest of the episode just doesn't come together for me at all. It's super unremarkable and not very funny, but I do appreciate the 2D sequence. It's pretty ambitious and I appreciate when they swing for the fences. Number 117, Where the Bugalo Roam. I think the saving grace of this episode is how it further develops Kif and Amy's relationship. That stuff all really works for me, but I think the remainder of the episode is pretty lackluster, with some unfortunate representation in the mix too. Showcasing the native Martians basically as Native Americans, to me, doesn't work great in this episode. Mostly because the entire resolution to the episode is the revelation that the native Martians hadn't been screwed out of their land by the Wongs, they had just actually been traded an incredibly valuable diamond for it, but they were too stupid to realize that the diamond was valuable. It's just not a very smart way to resolve that plotline. It does feature a lot of Zap, and he always brings it, plus the subplot where Zoidberg tries to force his way into being adopted by the Wongs is quite funny, but other than that, I don't love this episode. Number 116, Assy Come Home. So I see what they were trying to do with this one, but it felt a little try-hard. I wasn't a huge fan of the Crips and Bloods parody with the blips and cruds. The confusion over their near-identical gangwear was pretty funny, but this just felt like a weak premise overall. The episode came at the very end of the series, and it felt like they were doing their best to give Bender his own send-off episode, but I think they focused on the wrong things. They basically tried to pay off the years of the bite my shiny metal ass catchphrase by forcing a more emotional story about Bender actually losing his ass. And while I get it and appreciate the attempt, I think they probably would have been better off focusing on his friendships and the meaning found therein. The real through line with Bender is about his insecurities about his place in the universe, and I think it's really smart and funny to give this kind of a story to a robot. The best Bender stories always end with some type of realization that his relationships are the thing that give him meaning, like in Lethal Inspection or Godfellas. And while Bender is definitely bombastic and funny, I think it was a mistake to focus on something so silly to send him off, while playing it off as emotional. There were some better opportunities here. Alright, that is all of the D tier. We are now moving on to the C tier, and while this tier isn't full of my favorite entries, all of these episodes have something I really like or appreciate, which I think speaks to the show's quality overall. Number 115, All the President's Heads. So this is one that I really love in premise, but a little bit less in execution. Overall, the first two acts are pretty fun. The entire plot device for time travel here is actually one of my favorite concepts in the show. Basically, by licking a head in a jar, you can time travel back briefly to the time period from which that person originated. It's fun and out there and a cool extension of the head in jar technology we've seen the entire series. Plus, visually, I just love how this time travel zap looks. And while it's cool to see them jump to various time periods, I was kind of disappointed that the majority of it took place in revolutionary times. There are so many possibilities, and this time period just wasn't all that interesting to me, but overall, it's still a cool idea and premise. Unfortunately, the third act is where everything really falls apart as they change history and return to a new New York that still belongs to Britain, which as a concept I don't hate, but in execution it felt really lazy. Just super predictable British references and some pretty awful accents. Not my favorite, but the rest of the episode is cool. Number 114, 40% Lead Belly. This is another one that I unfortunately didn't find all that funny, but I really enjoyed that it was was another follow-up to Bender's ridiculous folk singing dreams. The idea that folk singers' music stemmed from their difficult lives and experiences was fun to explore, especially through Bender, as he realized that he lacked those key experiences. And the big twist of the episode was pretty interesting as well. Basically, Bender accidentally reverse-engineered his potential folk experiences. Through some 3D printing shenanigans, the things he writes about in his music actually start to come true. It's a neat premise, and I respect it. Number 113, Irreconcilable Indifferences. What a title. The first act of this episode is really fun, sending the crew to a convention and really reveling in the nerdistry it has to offer. It was funny to see Fry try to make his own self-insert comic book character, and Delivery Boy Man is a hilarious name. I also loved the way they gave the Futurama crew a cameo as they held a panel for their new series.
And we call it Futurilla!
This also might be my favorite Simpsons reference in the entire show right here.
When are you gonna make a second Simpsons movie?
This first act does a lot of heavy lifting in an otherwise just okay episode. I think focusing on Lur and Indinda so heavily was maybe a mistake. They're definitely best used in small doses as fun, belligerent side characters. I did enjoy the idea that this woman Lur starts seeing has an Omicronian kink and dresses up like an Omicronian unbeknownst to Lur, at least conceptually. Overall, solid, but not great. Number 112, Fry and Leela's Big Fling. I really liked the first act of this episode, as Fry and Leela try desperately to find alone time, which is interrupted by their friends and coworkers over and over again. After years of them sort of slowly easing their way into Fry and Leela finally being a thing, it was nice to have such a clear and plain confirmation in such a fun way. The rest of the episode definitely has some fun stuff going for it too. The automated getaway that Fry and Leela go on is neat technologically. Bringing in Leela's ex Sean after only being mentioned by name was a funny callback. And even weirder, we get the return of both Dr. Banjo from A Clockwork Origin and Gunther from Mars University in this Ape Society storyline. And the twist that Fry and Leela were actually exhibits in a zoo was unexpected. Not a perfect episode, but some great moments and ideas. Number 111, Zap Dingbat. I appreciate this episode for two reasons. One, it dives into the lives of Leela's parents more than we've seen before, and I wish the show had done more of this. And two, it actually attempts to give Zap Brannigan some real tangible development. Granted, that development is sort of undone by the end of the episode, but I still appreciate it. I think doing a divorce story for Munda and Morris is actually a pretty smart move, especially in how it affects Leela. Leela really only learned she had parents a few years prior, so this is almost treated as though it's happening to a child. I'm not the hugest fan of Zap and Munda getting together, but I do appreciate that they really actually portrayed Zap as having real genuine feelings for her. And while I understand what they were going for with Leela's acting out over the divorce and new relationship, I think they maybe went a step too far when she tried to seduce Zap. I think this would have worked really well before Leela and Fry were more established, but I think one of the bigger problems in the revival seasons was their lack of willingness to solidify that relationship. It felt like they wanted to maintain the status quo to allow for events like this to happen and have Fry and Leela together, and it didn't really work in conjunction. But overall, I like the ideas presented, and this one I think has some really good stuff going for it. Number 110, Fry and the Eggman. You know, I'm a sucker for a character raises a baby dangerous creature storyline, so I think that's what I appreciate most about Fry and the Eggman. I don't know, that kind of stuff just always strikes a chord with me. I also think the concept of this creature being a bone vampire is silly in a pretty fun way. Just a creature who literally sucks the bones out of things, and it's fun to say bone vampire. Bone vampire. I wasn't as big a fan of the Angus McZongo character, and this is just another example like I just mentioned in Zap Dingbat, as we see Leela very clearly into Angus. And I get their inclination to be able to use Leela in the story this way, as it was one of the things we saw regularly in the original run, but it just feels like it undercuts the development. But overall, I appreciate the episode for its premise, and I also really like the design of Mr. Peppy, the bone vampire. Number 109, Free Will Hunting. So there seems to be a pattern with a lot of these revival episodes where I really appreciate the premise and am more mixed on the execution. Bender is arrested for some typical criminal behavior, but in his trial, he's let off the hook on the grounds that as a robot, he lacks free will. Now, you'd expect Bender to be stoked that he got away with it, but as Bender is pretty insecure about his existence in general, he hyperfixates and spirals about the whole lack of free will thing. This is a premise I really appreciate, but I think the journey leaves a bit to be desired. It was cool to see Chopek 9 again, first visited in Fear of a Bot Planet back in season 1, but his existential journey felt a little meandering. In the end, he's really just given a free will chip invented by the professor, then shoots the professor with his newfound free will, and then arrested and convicted. The fact that his conviction is considered the happy ending here is very funny, but overall, I think the tops and tails of the episode work great, while the middle leaves a bit to be desired. Number 108, Bender Gets Made. The introduction of the Robot Mafia, some of the funniest side characters in the entire series. How can you not love the Donbot, Joey Mousepat, and of course, Clamps? And while I do like these characters a lot, this episode was always just pretty solid to me. The entire first act feels very disconnected from the rest of the story outside of Leela's blindness, though the visual of Leela trying to fly the ship with an eye patch over her one eye is very funny. There are definitely some great funny moments here, like I cannot get over the idea that every time the ship blasts off, Fry and Bender eat blast-off sundaes. They must eat so much ice cream. So the pattern I'm noticing here is that mid-tier original run Futurama tends to be very funny with storylines that don't quite inspire me, and mid-tier revival Futurama doesn't make me laugh too much, but has some really great premises. Who knew? Number 107, Spanish Fry. Alright, this is another of the episodes I just mentioned. Very funny episode, but very weird and lackluster storyline. But luckily, my good friend Tunerific Tariq has some thoughts on Spanish Fry, so I'm gonna let him ramble for a minute. Go, Tariq!
Yeah, so like I'm recording these out of order, so this is actually my last one. I'm in this video like 2 more times, just let's call that like a spoiler, I guess. TOONRIFICTARIQ, head of the Offbeat Kiki fan club, Family Guy apologist, and registered flex offender. I said flex. I said flex. Spanish Fry is fucking jokes, man. It appeals right to my immature sensibilities. Fry gets abducted by aliens, and they take his nose to use as an aphrodisiac for fucking. But then they realize that cutting off his sorry little meat would work even better. So the whole back half of this episode is just fucking dick jokes. It's so fucking stupid. I think in a relentlessly smart and thought-provoking show like Futurama, it is really fun to just see these characters in the dumbest situations possible. This one isn't for everybody. If this isn't like your kind of humor or anything, it's definitely a skippable joint. But in a show that forces you to constantly use your brain, it's nice that they focus on another organ this time. That being the wang. Good job, guys.
Number 106, Futurama the Game, aka The Lost Adventure. Alright, we've made it to the video game. Now back in the day when Futurama was canceled for the first time, I was absolutely desperate for more. I started reading the comic books, which I enjoyed, but I really missed these characters' voices and seeing the Planet Express crew in action. So I bought the last piece of Futurama media I had yet to see, Futurama the Game. I actually still have my copy for Xbox. And boy, this game was tedious. The cutscenes were very funny and the premise was engaging as ever, but the game itself was long and difficult. I did eventually beat the entire thing, but it took me a while. Overall, the gameplay itself is just okay, but luckily on the Beast with a Billion Backs DVD, they released a version with cutscenes edited together like an actual episode, complete with new sound effects and intro sequence. I think this is a pretty fun story. It starts with the professor selling Planet Express to Mom, much to everybody's confusion, which makes Mom take a majority control of the planet, turning it into a massive spaceship itself. The end involves some time travel and actually puts the entire story into a perpetual loop, as the end of the game leads right back into that opening cutscene. So while it doesn't really fit into the Futurama canon overall, I really enjoyed how they delivered that twist. I will say the Lost Adventure cut doesn't quite give you everything the game has to offer. There are some smaller cutscenes that get lost in the cut, and a lot of the game's self-references to the fact that it's a game are cut out. They basically explain the game mechanics away with sci-fi devices, so when the characters die, they're revived in this big toaster-like device. While this still exists in the story, the funny gags along with it, like the game over screen right before they properly introduce it, are cut out, along with some other game references. There are supercuts of all the cutscenes available on YouTube if you're interested in seeing the difference though. If you've never seen The Lost Adventure, definitely give it a watch in some form. Number 105, A Leela of Her Own. This has always been a less appreciated episode of Futurama by the fans, and to a degree, I always felt somewhat similarly. I do appreciate that it dives headfirst into Blurnsball, a chaotic sport to say the least, but I never quite connected with the story. However, my good friend Tunerific Tariq does connect with this one, and he made me see it from a different perspective when we talked about it on our podcast. And while it's not super high on my list, I want to give him this platform to explain why this episode means so much to him. Tariq, welcome back. It's been a few minutes.
Fam, I just got to my damn car. Now you would've called me back to record this shit? Okay. I don't know, I was like Johnny when I was a kid. This episode didn't really stand out to me too crazy. It was just kind of fine. But I guess as an adult, this episode kind of started to take a little bit of a different meaning for me. Leela is put in an extremely difficult position because she is the very first woman Blurnsball player. Because of this, she's damn near expected to set the tone, set the example. The world has never seen a woman Blurnsball player before, so they take her as an example as to what all women can do in the sport. That's why Jackie's so frustrated by her existence and how she plays the sport. But like, That's not Leela's fault, right? Leela should be granted the same liberty to play the game how she wants to and make her own mistakes, just like every male player has. But that's what happens. That's what happens when you're the minority in a situation. You have to break the door down. You have to take those punches. Leela was so Jackie and everyone after her could be. I think that's super interesting. I sort of resonate with this too. I am in no way the only black person who makes videos like this. I want to make that very, very clear. There are a lot of people of color out there in this community doing insanely dope shit. I've made it my mission to let everybody else be heard in any way that I can, but I swear I get messages every single day about how I'm the first person that looks like this, that people come across that talk about cartoons this way. This kind of representation is valuable for people, and it adds just this kind of pressure because if you're not good, what exactly are you representing? Are you representing or are you just harming those that follow you? A Leela of her own explores all of this. I didn't notice this as a kid, but man, is that interesting. It shows that even on episodes that we don't think about as heavy, Futurama can still manage to be insanely thought-provoking.
Number 104, I Dated a Robot. It's so funny how many people don't realize that this premise was actually pretty topical. The company in the episode that steals celebrities' likenesses is called Kid Napster, a reference to one of the first peer-to-peer file sharing clients used to pirate music, Napster. I am old. I like but don't love this episode, though there are definitely aspects I love. I think in general it is always funny when Futurama does an old educational style video, and the video about the dangers of dating robots is super funny. It's also got a surprisingly heartfelt moment between Fry and his Lucy Lubot at the end, even though it's amidst an avalanche of popping popcorn. Very funny stuff in this one, but overall just an okay premise. Number 103, Love and Rocket. Another weird romance story. This one between Bender and the Planet Express ship. I really like this conceptually, though it was kind of weird for them to just introduce the autopilot here. But overall, it's funny. They break a lot of rules in this one, like when the Planet Express ship rings the doorbell outside the window of Fry and Bender's apartment. That's just weird. But there's some great stuff in this episode. The big climax where the ship tries to merge its programming with Bender is really cool visually, and the subplot with Fry and Leela ends in a really sweet way. Even though the premise is a little basic, with Fry trying to find the perfect candy heart message for Leela, the ending is undeniably effective. Leela's air starts to run out, and Fry secretly gives her his air supply. When she realizes this, she gives him mouth-to-mouth and saves his life, and he spits out the perfect candy heart. This worked way better than it should have. Good episode. Number 102, Inagata de Leela. This was the second episode of the Comedy Central era, and people were mixed on it. Personally, I think it really succeeds through Zapp Brannigan, who is really at the forefront of the story. The premise itself is a little sweaty, seeing Leela and Zapp strand themselves in a Garden of Eden type scenario, but the humor from Zapp is undeniable. Not only is the Billy West performance hilarious, but they continuously cut to these really creative, transcredible exploits of Zapp Brannigan sections, which are designed to look like an old-timey TV series. They're really cool visually and super funny. Don't want to beat a dead horse, but this is another that sort of tries to have its cake and eat it too, Fry and Leela with the ending, but it's a small part of an otherwise relatively fun platform for Zapp to be hilarious. Number 101, Proposition Infinity. This is one that felt a bit too topical at the time, playing off of California Proposition 8 back in 2008, but it at least took it in a relatively interesting direction. I don't love how they treat Amy here. It felt out of character to just make her instantly unfaithful to Kif, but I at least somewhat enjoyed her connection with Bender, and the social commentary with the robosexual rehab camp. The whole twist that Farnsworth is really only anti-robosexual marriage because of his previous relationship with a robot, and repressed feelings about that, was maybe a little dated and could have been handled with more nuance, but this released in like 2009, so I can cut it a bit of slack. I appreciate the message they were going for here, and the final shot of Kif riding off with Amy into the sunset on a motorcycle is pretty fun. Number 100, Fun on a Bun. Alright, this is one I'm very mixed on, because I really don't love the general premise, but it does have an undeniably effective final act. While at Oktoberfest, Leela breaks up with Fry, who then seemingly falls into a sausage grinder and dies, though as it turns out, he actually falls through this ice into an underground Neanderthal society, forgetting who he is and believing that he's a Neanderthal himself. Meanwhile, in her grief, Leela eternal sunshines herself to forget Fry. But throughout the episode, things keep tugging at both of their memories to have them remember one another. It ends in this big weird battle between the above ground society and the Neanderthals, and in that undeniably effective moment, Fry and Leela remember each each other while doing battle, and then kiss. There's this really great little sequence where you see all of their memories reconnecting in their minds, and they're all little snapshots from some of the best moments in the history of Fry and Leela. So I guess my thing here is that the episode itself is sort of a sweaty mess. I just don't really care for the Eternal Sunshine parody or the Neanderthal storyline, but like I said, the way they come together in the end is just such a nice moment that it makes me want to bump the episode up a lot more than maybe it deserves. I guess that's one of my weaknesses here. If an episode features a particularly impressive, heartfelt moment, it tends to bump the entire thing up in my ranking, even if the rest of the episode is lackluster. Number 99, Bender's Game. Alright, where to start with Bender's Game? It's easily my least favorite of the movies for a lot of reasons, but it also has plenty that I really do like about it. The big issue I have with this movie is that it feels completely disjointed. It's the one of these 4 movies that doesn't feel at all like a movie. It feels like a string of loosely connected episodes. And on top of this, I sadly think that the fantasy sequences leave a lot to be desired. The designs are really great, but I wish the fantasy world felt more unique and less like parody. Outside of the novelty of Futurama and fantasy, these parts don't really do much for me. Plus, the entire sci-fi explanation for why the crew gets teleported to this fantasy world is not particularly easy to follow. I've watched this movie like a dozen times and I still don't really get it. That being said, while it doesn't come together as a whole, there are tons of individual pieces throughout that I enjoy, especially in the first half. The entire demolition derby is really fun, and there's this awesome short sequence where the crew steals the ship to go to the derby, set to this song called Rocket Ship. I've always really liked this part. Bender starting to lose touch with reality once he unlocks his imagination and gets into Dungeons & Dragons has some very funny story beats, and the return to the HAL Institute for the first time since Insane in the Mainframe is very welcome to me. They've also got this big reveal that Mom's son Ignor is actually Farnsworth's son as well, and I like the way they come together to save the day. Plus, the aftermath of Farnsworth and Ignor's day saving leaves a big impact on the Futurama world at large, as it renders all dark matter useless. I like it when they change the world in some way. I only wish that the show had followed up the Farnsworth-Ignor relationship at all. They literally never even refer to it again after this movie, which is a huge missed opportunity. I would have really loved to see the weird little Farnsworth family of Hubert, Cupert, and Ignor trying to relate to one another in some way, especially Cupert and Ignor. Oh well, missed opportunity. Overall, Bender's Game is a disjointed mess, but as it's an entire movie, there is at least a lot of sequences I really like and appreciate. Number 98, The Thief of Baghead. This is an episode that I find to be incredibly creative. It basically chronicles a rivalry between Calculon and a famous actor named Langdon Cobb, who's an actor so revered for disappearing into his roles that he lives life with a bag over his head. It turns out Langdon is actually a race of alien parasite that feeds off of fame and attention, but if you gaze on its face with your own eyes, your entire life force is sucked out of you. It gets pretty out there, but conceptually, this is super interesting to me. But even more creatively, a being made of pure ego also has a physical id to offset it, which for Langdon comes in the form of his fungal guard dog. Until the big twist, the reveal that Langdon is actually the id and the fungus monster is actually the ego. And that ego monster grows into a bigger and more unstoppable monster the more Langdon is admired. I just think from a sci-fi perspective, this episode is really smart, and it also has some solid commentary on celebrity worship culture. They basically explain that this type of alien creature usually just sucks the life force out of a planet, but on Earth it took advantage of the obsession with fame and celebrity. The episode also actually showcases the literal death of Calculon, who decides that in order to best Langdon in their acting competition, he has to take actual poison and die in his performance. Like a lot of Revival era episodes, this might leave a bit of comedy to be desired, but the premise is undeniably well executed. Number 97, That's Lobstertainment. This is another original era episode that fans tend to look down on, but I think it actually has a lot going for it. Bringing in Zoidberg's uncle Harold Zoid, an old school silent hologram film star, and parody of the real world silent film star Harold Lloyd, this episode sends the crew to Hollywood. This episode features a lot of Calculon, which is always a positive, but to me the highlight of the entire thing is the ridiculous movie they're producing, centered around the president of Earth and his son/vice president. All the ways that the movie fly off the rails are really funny, and I think that this is a super undervalued aspect of the episode. This is maybe not the most sci-fi story, which I think might be why some fans don't love it, but it is a really funny one, and I think it deserves credit for that. Number 96, Mother's Day. This is the episode where the rest of the characters finally learn that Mom is not the sweet, lovable old lady she makes herself out to be. Mom basically uses the fact that she manufactures the world's robots to her advantage, using a failsafe that causes them to do her bidding. Basically a robot apocalypse story. There's a lot of super funny stuff going for this episode, but I particularly enjoy the reveal that Mom and Farnsworth had a relationship ship, and the subsequent plan for him to seduce her in order to stop the robot apocalypse. This will always sit in my mind as a classic Futurama ep with big implications for the characters and world. Number 95, Bendless Love. The setup to this episode is so funny, with Bender sleep bending tons of stuff around the Planet Express building, causing all kinds of trouble.
My Slinky! My cuddly little pet Slinky!
But the bulk of this episode is his romance with Angeline, which I think is pretty entertaining, alongside the return of Flexo. Bender's insecurities and jealousies basically force him into self-sabotage, which is a story that is all too real for some people. Through his fears that Angeline is into her ex, Flexo, Bender pretends to be Flexo and then causes her to fall back in love with him. It's a funny and sad story, not unlike the saga of Zoidberg's Slinky.
Good as new.
Dang, they really did give Bender a lot of different love stories over the course of the show, didn't they? Let's see, there's A Flight to Remember, Bendless Love, I Dated a Robot, Love and Rocket, Bend Her, Into the Wild Green Yonder, Proposition Infinity, The Bots and the Bees. I think that's all of them. Let me know if I missed any. Number 94, Leela and the Jeanstalk. This is another episode that I've got mixed feelings on. I really like the idea that Leela is starting to mutate further as she gets older. That's really good stuff. But the whole Beanstalk storyline is not very Futurama, if you ask me. This one, once again, is saved by its heartfelt story with Fry and Leela. In the end, Leela nearly breaks things off with Fry because of her mutations, but Fry refuses because he loves Leela for Leela. He doesn't care if she's covered in tentacles, and I think that's real sweet. Of course, due to the status quo, Leela is cured by the very end of the episode, but the heartfelt moment is still very meaningful. Plus, this one has this really fun little crossover.
What time is it? Time for you to shut up!
Number 93, Rebirth. The very first episode of the Revival era. Now, this episode had to do some work to clean up the Into the Wild Green Yonder cliffhanger, which obviously makes things a bit messy. On top of that, it was very fixated on the series being reborn premise, showing literally the entire cast be reborn through this weird device. So overall, this episode feels like it's trying to do maybe a little too much, but I think as I've watched and rewatched it, I've really grown to appreciate the Fry and Leela story here. It's a little sweaty in its explanation, what with the constant flashing back to reveal new information, but the reveal that both Fry and Leela are robots created by the opposite to cope with their loss is pretty sweet. Plus, every time I watch this episode, I laugh at the fact that Fry's personality was taken from security tapes of him in the bathroom.
I sure love Leela.
The idea that there are two Terminator-type robot versions of Fry and Leela living together out there is kind of nice, and the ending beat works really well for me. It's not Futurama at its best, but I think the Rebirth story maybe gets more flack than it should. Number 92, The Da Vinci Code. There's actually quite a few things I like about this episode. The entire setup being this historical mystery is fun. Obviously, it's a play on the Da Vinci Code, but it's also got Indiana Jones vibes, which really worked for me. And the big twist that Da Vinci was actually an alien from a planet of very intelligent beings is a super funny idea, especially the reveal that he's actually the dumbest one of those intelligent beings. It's a great twist and also kind of funny to think that one of history's smartest people was actually only smart in relation to humans. Plus, his ultimate demise is pretty funny.
Poor Leonardo da Vinci. He sure was stupid.
Number 91, The Inhuman Torch. I really like the setup to this episode, though the payoff maybe goes a bit too wild for me. Bender relishing in his success as a firefighter is very in character, and I really like the sequences that showed his ongoing savior mentality. I also really like the suspicions by the crew that he's actually starting more fires in order to be seen as a hero. That is very in character for Bender. But the ultimate reveal that it was like this magical little fire demon doing this is maybe where the episode loses me. He's like a little evil Calcifer from Howl's Moving Castle. I do appreciate the end, where Bender actually doesn't take credit for his good deeds. That's a really nice piece of growth for the character. Overall, solid episode. Number 90, The Cryonic Woman. This is the return of Fry's ex-girlfriend Michelle, though this time she's voiced by Sarah Silverman, and Sarah does a great job in the episode. I really like the idea here that while Fry really fits in and adapts to the future, this is much more difficult for Michelle, who is kind of freaked out by just about everything. I also laugh pretty hard at the Pauly Shore cameo and the way they portray him as very intelligent, even though he still talks like that.
Buddy.
The third act goes a little nuts, but it's still fun, as Michelle and Fry think they've frozen themselves to be in the year 4000, but actually just got transported to Los Angeles. There are some really funny LA-aimed jokes here, and I enjoyed the child street gang stuff. It's a funny episode. Number 89, Obsoletely Fabulous. This is a fun premise, feeding further into Bender's insecurities as he's effectively replaced by a new superior robot. But I really enjoyed this island of old misfit robots plotline, especially some of these designs and concepts for the older robots. The water wheel robot freaking out whenever the water gets low is so funny. I kinda dig the design for Wooden Bender too. The climax doesn't do a whole lot for me, but I like the twist that this was all in Bender's head as a way to accept this new robot into his life. Pretty fun premise and a solid episode. Number 88, T the Terrestrial. I really like the idea of subverting the ET story to be about an alien finding a human. That is just a super smart premise. I think maybe they could have made it a little bit less of an ET parody directly in some regards, but overall that's a small nitpick because the episode works pretty well. I also like that they utilized Omicron Persei 8 as the planet where Fry is discovered. The planet, characters, and alien species are familiar enough, but not overly familiar, so we get to see a lot of new stuff throughout their society in this one. Number 87, Calculon 2.0. This is such a cool episode premise, and I love how they followed up on Calculon's death. The idea that in death, Calculon was sort of living happily, thinking he'd gone out in a blaze of glory, only to discover that he's actually sort of seen as a joke, is really interesting. And yeah, it's not very sci-fi, and maybe I'm a bit hypocritical in when I appreciate the less sci-fi elements of Futurama and when I don't, but this one really worked for me. Plus, Farnsworth leading a weird sciencey satanic ritual is super in character. But I think the real reason this episode works is the final Calculon speech, as he reflects on his entire career and the way he's viewed by the public.
The name Calculon used to mean something. Now it's a stain that will never wash clean.
And in delivering this performance just before another untimely death, Calculon's reputation is saved. Good episode. Number 86, When Aliens Attack. Hey, back to season 1. This is one of my least favorite season 1 episodes, but it's still really fun. It introduces us to the Omicronians in a super fun way, and I really like the premise. Basically, the radio waves for 20th century TV have been finally reaching Omicron Persei 8, and Lur and Dindinda are particularly into a series called Single Female Lawyer. Unfortunately, back in the 90s, Fry messed up the radio signal, which sent the series finale off the airwaves, infuriating Lur. I just love the idea that an interplanetary conflict starts because of a 90s network drama. That's so funny. And I also enjoyed the solution, as they basically tried to do a live reenactment of the show written by Fry.
It took an hour to write. I thought it would take an hour to read.
But Lur, how do you feel about the episode When Aliens Attack?
We are reasonably satisfied with the events we have seen. Overall, I would rate it a C+. Okay? Not great.
I completely agree. Number 85, Mars University. Hey, more season 1. This is an episode whose premise I find to be just okay, but boy does it make up for it in laughs, especially the B-plot. The idea of the professor creating a super smart monkey to go to college is kinda funny, and the odd couple vibes between him and Fry are fun, but overall, the premise doesn't do all that much for me. But like I said, there are so many great bits.
The mathematics of quantum neutrino fields. I made up the title so that no student would dare take it.
Mathematics of wonton burrito meals.
I also just love everything about the Animal House parody subplot where Bender visits his old fraternity. Anytime the Dean yells Robot House is funny.
Cheese it! Robot House!
Now we're on to the B tier, the tier with the most episodes featured, which I think says a lot about the overall quality of the show. And honestly, for me, the episodes in this tier are all so close in quality that I've ended up swapping around a ton of them while writing this, so, you know, don't get too upset if you disagree with the ranking. They're all real tight. Number 84, A Pharaoh to Remember. This has never been one of my favorite episodes, but it's hard to deny some of its funnier moments. But what I like most about it is how it further explores Bender's insecurities about the mark he will leave on the world, about the meaning his life brought the universe. Even when being literally enslaved, Bender is fixated on being seen as the best slave. I really like when the show focuses on his insecurities. It's also just fun to say Hementhotep.
Viva Hementhotep!
Number 83, Into the Wild Green Yonder. The final Futurama movie and their second attempt at a series finale. There is plenty about this entry I like and plenty I dislike as well. It starts off pretty strong with a really fun lyricized take on the intro sung by Seth MacFarlane. While this movie has a lot going for it, I do feel like it can kind of feel overstuffed at times. I've talked a lot about it in other videos, but while there might be a few too many subplots, the ones that really work are Fry and Leela's parallel stories. While Leela is on the run from the law for her eco-feminist protesting, Fry is trying to help a secret organization discover and destroy an ancient evil known as the Dark One, and prevent it from destroying another ancient organism that's lying dormant in a violet dwarf star. The very same dwarf star that Leela's collective is trying to protect. So what works so well is the way these two stories come together, as it turns out Fry and Leela's separate goals are actually one and the same. And in the end, the ultimate solution comes down to Fry and Leela's trust in one another, which is a really nice way to potentially end the series. I've talked about this movie so much in other videos, so I don't want to go on too long, but it's solid. Number 82, That Darn Cats. Okay, this episode tends to get a lot of hate, but I actually think it's pretty underrated. A lot of fans wrote it off as lazy cat meme humor, which was very popular just before Futurama's revival season, and fans saw this as too topical. But I think the episode actually barely relies on the meme aspects of cat humor and really holds its own on the sci-fi side of things. For one, it's a great Nibbler episode, and is pretty much the only one that explores Nibbler's role after the entire crew discovers that he can speak. One of my favorite jokes is when the crew is dressing their new cat up in Nibbler's sailor outfit, which he claims is his real naval uniform.
My best friend died in that uniform.
Overall, this is a fun episode that I believe gets some unfair criticism. Number 81, Near Death Wish. Near Death Wish is a really interesting episode from the later seasons. It introduces Farnsworth's parents, who live on the near Death Star, which was first showcased back in A Clone of My Own. I think what makes this one most interesting is the way it explores and elaborates on the professor's upbringing through his parents. And though it isn't my favorite episode in the comedy department, that development always kept me really engaged. It also has a really sweet ending where the professor hooks himself into the near Death Star's virtual reality system so that he can have a real childhood with his parents again. It's nice. Number 80, Why Must I Be a Crustacean in Love? This is basically the first episode to really focus on Zoidberg, and though I think it doesn't really explore him in the same ways that make him most interesting as the show goes on, it is a very funny episode. It's a loose parody of the classic Star Trek episode Amok Time, in which Spock starts to lose control because he needs to participate in the Vulcan mating ritual. This is basically what happens to Zoidberg, sending the crew to his home planet, Decapod 10. There are some great gags on Zoidberg's home planet, like the cars having scuttling crab legs instead of wheels, or the fact that they have a restaurant called Red Primate. The end of the episode is really funny too, as Zoidberg and Fry have to battle it out gladiator style for Edna's love. I die every time Zoidberg cuts off Fry's arm.
I'll kill you, you bastard!
Solid episode. Number 79, The $6 Million Mon. I really just like this episode for how fun the premise is. Basically, in order to increase his own efficiency and be able to protect himself and his wife, Hermes starts to replace parts of his body with robot parts, until eventually he is more robot than man. It's sort of the Ship of Theseus question, but with robot parts on a Jamaican man. While this one doesn't make me laugh as much as your typical Futurama episode, the premise is fun enough that it keeps me really engaged. Plus, it sort of brings a resolution to the long-standing background gag that Hermes super hates Zoidberg, as Zoidberg eventually saves Hermes, who then reluctantly thanks him. Fun ep. Number 78, Ghost in the Machines. This is another one where I just really like the premise. It follows up Lethal Inspection and shows Bender actually die, but also become a robot ghost. Yeah, the sci-fi there is a little far-fetched, but Bender haunting Fry endlessly through all of his technology is honestly really fun to watch. There's a really fun exorcism parody when Reverend Preacherbot comes to try and stop Fry from being haunted, and I'm maybe not as huge of a fan of the final act when Fry goes to live in an Amish colony to avoid the technology that's haunting him, but I do like the way the resolution comes together, as Fry is nearly killed by a runaway barn, and Bender inhabits the robot devil's body to save Fry. It's a nice moment. Number 77, Put Your Head on My Shoulders. An early season 2 classic. This is a prime example of how Futurama can take a typical sitcom idea and bring a really fun sci-fi twist to the table. The sitcom setup here is that Fry and Amy start dating and then break up. Your typical sitcom would make it all about the uncomfortable drama that comes with the pair of them working together after the breakup, but Futurama dials it up a notch in a really fun way. After Fry is in a car accident, his head is attached to Amy's body, forcing them to be together every waking moment, even after they've broken up. Plus, there's just tons of funny moments in this one, like everything at the car dealership.
One word. Thundercuckoo-Fackenbird.
And when Amy haggles the price up when trying to buy a car, which makes malfunctioning Eddie explode. This is just a very fun classic episode. Number 76, A Tale of Two Santas. A classic Christmas romp. This is the follow-up to Xmas Story as they bring back Robot Santa, but after he's frozen in ice on Neptune, Bender takes over and tries to celebrate Christmas the right way, without all the violence and murder. Interestingly, they couldn't get John Goodman back to reprise his role as Robot Santa in this one, so John DiMaggio took over, but you can barely tell the difference. He really kills it. This introduces the elf-like Neptunians and has a great musical number that used to get stuck in my head a lot as a kid.
But we gladly work for nothing, which is good because we don't intend to pay.
This episode also introduces Kwanzaa Bot, played by Coolio, who I love.
I
I've been giving these out for 647 years.
And also features this classic moment as the entire crew pretends to be Santa to save Bender from execution.
And I'm his friend Jesus.
Number 75, A Flight to Remember. This was the first real direct parody that Futurama ever did. I generally prefer when they pay homage to things without directly parodying, but there are definitely some great aspects to this episode. This is actually the first time we learn much more about Hermes as they talk about his history as a limbo champion, and I think it's the first appearance of La Barbara too. This one is also the first real potential romantic moment between Fry and Leela as they look at this beautiful nebula together and nearly kiss. There's a fun Three's Company subplot where Fry has to pretend to be dating Amy in front of her parents, but also pretend to be dating Leela in front of Zap Brannigan, which makes for some really funny moments.
Let me think. Come and knock on our door. Na 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 na.
Oh dang, this episode also introduces Amy's parents, doesn't it? Lots of character expansions here. The main attraction is the story of Bender and the Countess, which is the Titanic parody, and must have been written shortly after the movie came out. There are some really fun moments here, and it's nice to see Bender care about someone, but I do think the ending beat could have maybe packed a bigger punch emotionally. Though this also teases Kif and Amy for the first time. Dang, this one really did lay down a lot of groundwork. Number 74, I second that emotion. The very first episode of Production Season 2, this is a fun story for both Leela and Bender. When Bender's lack of empathy goes too far, leading him to flush Nibbler down the toilet, the professor installs an empathy chip that forces him to feel Leela's emotions. It's funny to see Bender fight with himself as he deeply feels Leela's loss of Nibbler, even though he doesn't actually care personally. Also, when Bender flushes himself down the toilet, Fry delivers one of my favorite lines in the entire series.
Bender? Bender? Have you seen my sombrero?
This also introduces the mutants, who I guess at this point were just an urban legend, though the canon of that fact changes since they're not allowed on the surface, so they have to be known to some degree for that to be a fact. But I really like the introduction of their society, and I've always thought the design of their sewer city is really cool. Plus, this actually teases Leela's parents for the first time in a short background appearance, years before the full reveal, and in only the 14th episode ever produced. It's really cool to see how long they had these things planned out. Number 73, A Taste of Freedom. This is a great Zoidberg episode and the third in the Free Waterfall saga. When Zoidberg eats the Earthican flag on Freedom Day, he becomes public enemy number 1 and retreats to the Decapodian embassy, basically starting an all-out war. I think this is pretty interesting commentary about American freedom and how in a lot of ways it's sort of a fallacy, caring more about the symbol than the actual freedom it represents. There are also some jokes that age super poorly, like when Old Man Waterfall is booed by the entire courtroom because he's a polygamist and has a husband. Obviously this was written in the early 2000s, but even just 20 years later, this isn't even believable. I love the sequence with Zap Brannigan and the Decapodian spy whom Zap is oblivious to.
Human, sir.
Human. Now that's a name I can trust.
It perfectly encapsulates Zap's incompetence, and his chastising Kif is just the icing on the cake. I also love the resolution here, as despite the fact that he has been demeaned, tried, and victimized by the Earthican government, Zoidberg still stands up to defend freedom, even from his planet of origin. It's nice to hear him say that Earth is really his home planet, and stand up for freedom. Number 72, A Clone of My Own. The introduction of Cupert Farnsworth, the professor's clone. This introduction was actually supposed to happen a bunch of times over the course of the series until it eventually fell to this episode, and I think it's a pretty fun one. It's a fun way to play on the parental expectations trope, as Farnsworth clones himself specifically so that Cupert can take over his business and scientific endeavors, though he quickly discovers that Cupert isn't actually interested in doing that. Though in the end, Cupert opts to follow in his father's footsteps, which I'm not sure was the best lesson, but either way, it works pretty effectively in the episode. They heist the professor from the near Death Star, and Cupert reveals the secret to the Planet Express ship's faster than light travel, which is very silly. It basically moves the universe around it, rather than moves through the universe. Classic Futurama sci-fi nonsense. Number 71, The 30% Iron Chef. I really enjoy the episodes that focus on Bender's weird dreams that are very un-robot-like, and this one is basically quintessential in that regard. Bender trying to be a chef was always so funny to me since he literally cannot taste anything. This sort of has a Karate Kid vibe as Bender trains with an old chef named Spargle in order to get revenge on Elzar, which culminates in an Iron Chef competition between Bender and Elzar. Bender ends up winning the competition thanks to a secret ingredient given to him by Spargle, and this has always been one of my favorite jokes in the entire series, as the professor tells Bender the ingredient was just ordinary water.
Yes, ordinary water, laced with nothing more than a few spoonfuls of LSD.
Number 70, Less Than Hero. When I was younger, this was one of my absolute favorite episodes of Futurama, and I guess that likely had to do with my love for superheroes. And while the superhero stuff does still have some really funny aspects, as I've gotten older, this one has slipped down my list. I actually think the highlight is how Leela's crime fighting is getting in the way of her attempts to connect reconnect with her newfound parents, which is a fun way to explore that dynamic after the reveal. This was the first episode that featured her parents after Leela's homeworld. But obviously there's a few huge laughs to be had here too, like when they're running down the evil zookeeper's animal accomplices.
An elephant who never forgets to kill.
Citizen Snips!
Funny stuff. Number 69. Nice. Mobius Dick. Nice. Now this is an episode that for me completely succeeds on the coattails of its sci-fi premise. I guess space whales are actually kind of common in sci-fi. I've seen them in at least a few different properties, but I really like the way Futurama tackled it. The concept of the Bermuda tetrahedron is fun too, and visually it was really cool to see them fly through it. I also like the twist that the space whales are actually fourth dimensional and basically swim through time. This one also gives some more backstory to the early days of Planet Express, showcasing one of the earlier crews and revealing that they were consumed by the space whale. It also showed that Zoidberg's lack of popularity wasn't always how he was perceived.
You totally got me, Dr. John. You're hilarious.
Number 68, Benderama. This is actually another that I really appreciate for the sci-fi premise. It tackles the gray goo theory in a really fun way, as Bender uses one of the professor's inventions to create smaller duplicates of himself, who then do the same thing over and over until there are countless Benders of various sizes. But once they reach microscopic levels is when it reaches the nanobot gray goo storyline, as the tiny Benders basically become matter-consuming parasites who consume everything in their path in order to create more Benders. I really like the way the story plays out, and especially enjoy the visuals of the gray goo consuming things throughout the episode. Like a lot of the revival episodes, I think there might be a bit to be desired in the comedy department, but the episode itself is pretty cool. Number 67, Viva Mars Vegas. This is a really fun heist parody that also sort of tackles the idea of indigenous reparations in an interesting way. It's a Zoidberg and Amy heavy episode, and I appreciate Futurama's take on the heist genre as they attempt to steal from the robot mafia, who has taken over the Wong's casino. But I think the most interesting thing this episode does is have Amy actually gift the casino and the Wong Ranch back to the native Martians after they get it back from the robot mafia. I think it's a nice thought, especially after the native Martians weren't exactly characterized in a flattering way back in their introduction in Where the Buggalo Roam. Number 66, Kif gets knocked up a notch. I really appreciate this episode for how it further explores Kif and Amy's relationship, even if I think it might feel a bit meandering. The entire setup is that Kif becomes pregnant, and they're not sure who the other biological parent is because his species procreates through simple physical contact. It turns out that Leela is the actual mother of their children, but Amy agrees to raise them with Kif anyways, which leads to her own existential crisis in regards to how her life will change in motherhood. In the end, it turns out the babies grow up in the swamps of Kif's home planet without parental intervention, and while I understand this is a status quo show, it's funny to me that Kif didn't communicate this to Amy while she was panicking about motherhood. Overall, this one has some funny moments and good development for Kif and Amy. Number 65, War is the H word. This episode has such a funny setup as Fry and Bender enlist in the military so they can get a small military discount to buy gum. So stupid and so funny. Unfortunately, before they can quit the army,
war were declared.
This is a Zap Brannigan heavy episode, which is always going to be funny. Leela also secretly joins the army and pretends to be a man, which is another outdated concept given that women could definitely join the army even when this was written. It's kind of weird that they specified that, but I do guess the comedy of Leela disguising her identity is pretty fun. It's also funny to see Leela outperform everyone else. Also gave us one of my favorite jokes.
Check out that guy. He makes Speedy Gonzales look like regular Gonzales.
The end of the episode is also very funny as they put a bomb in Bender to try and destroy the enemies from within the negotiation, but only when Bender says his most uttered word, ass. But I think the biggest laugh is Bender's second most uttered word.
Number 2, daffodil. Hot diggity daffodil.
Number 64, Tip of the Zoidberg. While I think this episode sort of flies off the rails in the third act, I love how it develops Zoidberg and his relationship with the professor. We basically learn that Zoidberg is the professor's oldest and closest friend, dating back to their time working for Mom in the early 2900s, which I guess makes Zoidberg way older than we thought. While on a mission, Farnsworth is exposed to hypermalaria and makes Zoidberg promise to kill him if he ever exhibits symptoms, which sort of recontextualizes their entire working relationship through the years. I just really like the way this episode leans into Zoidberg's selfless nature and shows the lengths he would go to help others. He literally gave up a life of success and luxury to help his friend. And while I don't really love the whole Yetiism twist or the weird machine they build to kill the professor, I think the messages behind the episode are really nice. Number 63, The Birdbot of Icecatraz. This overall isn't one of my favorite premises, but I do think it has some classically hilarious Futurama moments. In general, I think the show has done a better job implementing its pro-environmental messages than they do in this one. But again, there's some truly funny stuff here. Leela quits Planet Express to help stop a dark matter tanker from flying too close to Pluto's penguin preserves, which makes Bender the new captain of the ship, pitting Fry against him in the process. I love how angry Fry is at Bender in such a stupid way.
Captain Bender, he's the best. At being a big jerk who's stupid and his big ugly face is as dumb as a butt.
I've heard better.
But I think the funniest part about the episode is how the dark matter spill affects the penguins. It basically causes them to procreate at an alarming rate and become a danger to themselves through overpopulation. So the only way for these pro-environmentalists to save the penguins is to kill the penguins. Just a really funny concept. Number 62, Law and Oracle. This is an episode that was really well received by the Futurama fan base when it aired, and while I think it's very solid, I didn't quite love it as much as they did. Though it has a lot going for it. Fry joins the police, which basically morphs into a Minority Report parody, which I definitely think is the highlight of the episode, as Bender is predicted to commit a major crime, pitting Fry against him. Overall, it's pretty fun and has some smart jokes, like when they pull over Schrodinger.
The cat, is it alive or dead? Alive or dead?
And the twist that the Minority Report robot was orchestrating his own heist was well executed. It's a fun episode. Number 61, The Cyber House Rules. The one where Leela has two eyes, with special guest Tom Kenny as Adlai Atkins. This is a fun episode that I think showcases a lot of what I love about Leela. Adlai is a doctor who is very fixated on things being average, which is a super funny gimmick for a character, but I really like how this challenges Leela, who recognizes that she was fine the way she was, and that his fixation on being normal is actually pretty insulting. Leela was great before her eye was quote-unquote fixed, and she really puts him in his place at the end of the episode. This also has the funny Bender adoption subplot, which has some great jokes.
What is it with you kids? Every other day it's food, food, food.
But even that story has a sweet, heartfelt ending. Number 60, Fear of a Bot Planet. Back to season 1. This one feels like very early Futurama in that its premise is relatively basic, but I kind of love and miss those vibes. The crew has to make a delivery to a planet made up entirely of robots, but Bender has to execute the delivery because they're hostile to humans. There are some really funny sequences in this one, like when Fry and Leela have to pretend to be robots. I especially like how good Leela is at doing the robot dance. I think my biggest laugh of the entire episode is the end sequence though, which is told through Polaroids as Fry and Leela celebrate Bender's made-up holiday, Robonica. I die every time I see Bender holding the broken bottle up to Fry's neck, followed by a photo of Fry with bandages on his neck. So funny. Number 59, Decision 3012. Overall, I think this is a very solid revival episode, even if it's got a few issues that I feel plagued the final 52. For one, I'm glad they finally followed up ahead in the polls with a new election episode. The show went like 12 years between election episodes. There are some really fun ideas here, especially when they reveal the time travel plotline and return of the time code from Bender's big score. I always appreciate when Leela gets caught up in trying to do the right thing and make the world a better place, and this episode is a prime example of that. I guess my small issues are the topical references in the election. It's all about Nixon wanting to build a wall around the solar system, and there is literally a birther movement parodying the Obama birther movement for the candidate Chris Travers, which is just exhausting to me. They at least brought their own twist to the table, but I was pretty over these topical references in the revival years, but that doesn't take all that much away from an otherwise really fun episode. Number 58, A Clockwork Origin. This is one of those Futurama episodes that makes me think more than it makes me laugh, and I really appreciated its approach. It tackles the evolution versus creation debate in an effective and nuanced way. I really enjoyed that an intelligent orangutan, Dr. Banjo, was actually the evolution denier, real Planet of the Apes vibes. This episode is also the origin of another classic Futurama meme.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
But I think the genius of this episode is how it illustrates both sides of the debate. Basically, Farnsworth, who is very anti-creationism, creates nanobots that end up evolving very quickly into larger robotic organisms, proving that evolution is real. But on the flip side, in order for that evolution to exist, Farnsworth himself had to create the nanobots. Futurama is interesting because it's filled with scientific-minded folks, but also, based on the subject matter, they definitely have some religious influence. I'm not religious myself, but I really appreciated that this episode sort of reconciled these two sides of Futurama's identity in an intelligent way. Number 57, My Three Sons. Every time I get to another season 1 episode on this list, I get kind of excited. I really think season 1 is underrated. It has such a different vibe than every other season, and this is basically a quintessential season 1 episode. And if I recall, this was one of the very first episodes of the show I ever saw. When Fry accidentally drinks the emperor of a planet, he becomes the new emperor, much to Leela's dismay, all on a planet with 3 suns. When I was younger, the absolute funniest thing in the world to me was Fry's nonsensical story about the grasshopper and the octopus. All year long, the grasshopper kept burying acorns for winter while the octopus mooched off his girlfriend and watched TV.
But then the winter came and the grasshopper died, and the octopus ate all his acorns, and also he got a race car.
This is just perfect stupid humor. I really like this episode. Number 56, The Deep South. Man, there might not be any reveal funnier in all of Futurama than the lost city of Atlanta. Just such a funny take on the Atlantis myth. This is a really good example of how Futurama can bring its own twist to more mythological stories too, though there are still definitely sci-fi aspects at play. Bringing mermaids into the story and creating hilarious lore about how Atlanta sank to the bottom of the ocean is vintage Futurama. Plus, you gotta love getting cameos from all of the most famous Atlanteans.
Ted Turner, Hank Aaron, Jeff Foxworthy, the guy who invented Coca-Cola, the magician.
There are some other great gags in this one too, like Zoidberg's new underwater house burning down, or even the beat when Fry and Umbriel realize that mermaids and humans aren't sexually compatible. This isn't an episode of Futurama that makes you think too hard, and it's not particularly emotional, but boy does it make you laugh. Number 55, The Beast with a Billion Backs. I've talked a lot about this one before, and I think some people might be surprised it's so high on my list. Many think it's the worst of the Futurama movies, but over time, this one has just grown on me more and more. For one, it's really, really funny, and I don't think it gets enough credit for that simple fact. And though the story and plot can feel a little bit disjointed, especially in comparison to Bender's Big Score, which came immediately before it, I really appreciate the themes it brings to the table and how they manage to tie them all together pretty effectively. It's basically a story about jealousy. Fry is jealous of Colleen's other boyfriends, Kif is jealous of Zap, the Professor and Wernstrom have some major professional jealousy, and of course Bender is jealous of Fry and Yivo's relationship, leading to a literal battle between heaven and hell. I talk about it a bunch in my Futurama movie retrospective, so if you're interested in more, check that out. But yeah, this ended up slowly moving up from my least favorite Futurama movie to my second favorite. It also features one of Brittany Murphy's final performances, and she's great.
And today, I was promoted to Chief of Police.
Number 54, Anthology of Interest 1. The first ever Futurama anthology episode, and it's a fun one. The opening story has such a funny introduction, as Bender makes it sound like he's gonna ask what it would be like if you were a human.
So, I've always secretly wondered, what if I was 500 feet tall?
And this is really just pure dumb fun as Giant Bender and Fry become friends, with the highlight definitely being the montage set to Hansen's Mbop, before Bender crushes them, of course. The second story is a fun murder mystery. We basically find out that if Leela was more impulsive, she would just do a whole bunch of murdering. There are some great visual gags in this one, especially in the parlor when they're trying to solve the murder. The final sequence is chock full of great cameo appearances from Al Gore, Nichelle Nichols, Gary Gygax, and Stephen Hawking, which is a ton of fun, where we see what would happen if Fry was never frozen and sent to the future. It gets kind of silly, but it does seem like an early hint that Fry's existence in the future was actually vitally important to the continued existence of the universe. Good episode. Number 53, Bender should not be allowed on television. I think the real highlight of this episode is how much All My Circuits we get in the mix. When a robot actor malfunctions on set, Bender takes over the role and becomes a terrible role model for kids. This is one of the episodes that prominently features Cupert and Dwight as they succumb to Bender's bad influence, which I think is a smart way to use the pair of them. Dwight is really only heavily featured in, I want to say, 2 episodes? The Route of All Evil in this one, and I guess a bit in Bender's game. Did they even use him in the revival seasons at all? It was funny to see Farnsworth and Hermes team up as upset parents, and you know I love a funny acronym, so I'm a big fan of Fathers Against Rude Television.
No, sir, not us fathers!
And I know it's ridiculously messed up, but I cannot deny how much I laugh at Bender's lesson at the end of the episode.
Have you ever tried simply turning off the TV, sitting down with your children, and hitting them?
Overall, this is just a bombastic and ridiculously fun Bender episode, and that's hard not to love. Number 52, Silence of the Clamps. This is such a fun episode from the revival seasons, as Bender goes into witness protection and Clamps replaces him on the Planet Express crew in an attempt to get to Bender to kill him. This is actually, I think, the funniest Robot Mafia episode overall. Even though I love those characters, the episodes that feature them aren't always my favorite. Clamps' rivalry with Zoidberg is really funny, and I've mentioned this line many times, but it is absolutely undeniable how goddamn hilarious this delivery is.
It's Zoidberg. John Zoidberg!
This is one of the only times in the entire show that they drop an F-bomb, and it's fitting for a mob story. It kills me every time. Big fan of Clamps, big fan of this episode. Number 51, The Bots and the Bees. Okay, this episode completely succeeds on how goddamn cute it is. When Bender accidentally has a kid with the new vending machine, he's forced to be a single dad. Bender's son is named Ben Vending Rodriguez, named after his dad and the fact that his mother is a vending machine. Just good, great, clever stuff. The montage where Bender and baby Ben commit a ton of crimes together is so cute and so funny, and their relationship is not only a highlight of the episode, but a highlight of the entire entire revival run. Ben loves bending, but only has a single memory card slot, so in order to learn to bend, he'd have to forget his father. It's a really sad and heartfelt ending where Bender sacrifices his relationship with his son so that he can follow his dreams. And while I kinda wish we got to explore his relationship past this episode, this ending is lovely.
Just remember, your daddy loves you. Remember that, will you, son? Remember that.
Great episode. Number 50, The Mutants Are Revolting. Ironically, number 50 is the 100th episode, and I think the coolest thing it does to celebrate is have a big status quo shifting event that actually alters the world of Futurama. This one is all about Leela being outed as a mutant, meaning she isn't allowed on the surface. She's then forced to live in the sewers, where she decides to lead a mutant uprising to fight for their rights to live with everyone else. I really like this idea. I guess my one issue with it is that it kind of makes Leela look selfish. She never thought to fight for the rights of mutants until after she was personally affected by the way society marginalizes them, but at least it makes for a fun story. I appreciated how they used the band Devo, and visually, the land Titanic sinking into the street is super funny to me, though ultimately, I'm not sure that the big twist was all that effective, which involves the reveal of Leela's grandmother. Really feels like Leela should have been introduced to her grandmother sooner. But overall, I really appreciate the 100th episode. Number 49, A Farewell to Arms. This is another where I feel the premise is super sweaty, as it tries to play on the end of the world Mayan calendar concept, but fortunately, it succeeds in its character work and sweet moments. I've actually talked about this one in a couple other videos, and the premise is so sweaty that it just feels really difficult to even explain it all again, but I'll do my best to summarize it more quickly. Basically, when the world is ending, Fry gives up his spot on the spaceship that will save a chunk of humanity, and he gives it to Leela. Then, when it turns out Mars was the doomed planet, not Earth, and Mars starts barreling towards Earth, the crew has to literally jump from the surface of Mars to the surface of Earth. Since Leela is injured, she can't make the jump, and Fry attempts to save her. Now, the entire episode, Fry's been asking Leela to take his hand for various reasons, and in the end, when she takes his hand as he tries to save her, their arms both get pulled out of their sockets. But the final shot is just so beautiful as we see Fry and Leela's hands holding each other, floating through space forever. This sweet payoff elevates the entire episode for me. Number 48, Simpso-Rama, the only Simpsons episode on this list. I've talked about this one a bunch in other videos, including LS Mark's 6-hour Simpsons ranking video, so bear with me if you've heard this before. This crossover event dropped about a year after Futurama aired its finale, and is full of tons of fun fan service, but also some surprisingly sweet moments. It actually feels more like a full-length Treehouse of Horror segment than it does a Futurama or Simpsons episode, but I actually think that works in its favor here. Bart basically causes a reaction within this time capsule that creates an army of mutant bunnies who run amok in the future. In a fun little homage, these bunnies are actually designed to look like the characters from Groening's comic strip Life in Hell. This causes the Planet Express crew to send Bender back in time to kill Homer Simpson, thinking that his DNA caused the mutation. I really love the time we see Homer and Bender spend together, and some of the other character team-ups are really fun, like Lisa, Frink, and Farnsworth. I also like that they spend the first half of the episode in Springfield and the second half in New York, giving time to both series settings. Overall, this isn't a perfect episode of The Simpsons or Futurama, but it's got a very solid story, and the novelty of seeing these universes interact goes a super long way. Plus, it's got this perfect little ending. After the Simpsons return to their time, Bender turns himself off for 1,000 years in their basement so that he can return to the future. And there's just this lovely little moment where Homer sort of embraces Bender, feeds him some beer, and tucks him off to sleep. I've said it before, but I see this as The Simpsons sort of sending off Futurama in a really sweet way. Hey, we're gonna look after you while you're sleeping. I love it. Number 47, Game of Tones. All right, I know a lot of you might be upset that this is so low, since this is a seriously beloved episode by the fans, and I definitely understand why. It's hard to deny the power of the final moments of this episode. They're really great. That being said, I think the rest of the episode leaves a bit to be desired. While it's really fun to revisit Fry's life just before he was frozen, and doing so through dreams is a nice twist on the flashback-style stories, I think that the future storyline is a bit lackluster. Basically, they're attempting to determine the source of this tone that is threatening to destroy the planet, and the answer might lie in Fry's memory from the day he was frozen. I just don't think the two stories tie together in a satisfying way. Fry hears the tone as he's falling into the freezer tube from the pilot, and it turns out just to be the key fob for the Neblonian spaceship. If that tone had actually been in the pilot, my mind would have been blown. But I was waiting for some really exciting and surprising reveal that made everything make sense, and instead it just kind of felt like this weird, unrelated cop-out. But despite this, the episode has some really great moments, especially in Fry's memories, including this great Seymour joke where they have Seth MacFarlane voice him for a moment.
Philip, have you lost weight
wait.
And of course, the ending is without a doubt one of the best executed endings in the show. After lamenting losing time with his mother in his dreams, Fry ends up having one more dream about her. But Nibbler reveals that it's actually his mother's dream, meaning she will remember the things he says to her. But Fry doesn't need to say anything, he just hugs her. This moment is so good. It's a huge tearjerker, one of the best in the series, and the reason this episode is higher on the list than it would have been otherwise. Number 46, Murder on the Planet Express. This was the third to last episode of the entire series, and man, is it just pure sci-fi fun. Now, last time I mentioned this episode, I jokingly called it Among Us the episode, and people got very, very mad at me. But I'm doubling down, this is Among Us the episode. But it's also a brilliant homage to Alien and The Thing, two all-time great films that you absolutely need to see if you never have. I just love that in its final run of episodes, Futurama opted for a pure sci-fi, borderline horror, fun episode. A lot of the episodes surrounding it opt for more emotional storylines. Game of Tones, Stench and Stenchability, and of course Meanwhile. But I'm glad in the final stretch, we just got a great, classic Futurama story that is fully driven by its science fiction. It's a great one. Number 45, Amazon Women in the Mood. This has always been one of the most recognizable fan favorite episodes of the series, and for good reason. It's incredibly funny, but I don't know anybody who likes this one more than my good friend D'Angelo Edwards of Hats Off Media, so he's gonna break it down for you.
Amazon Women in the Mood is one of my favorite episodes of Futurama. It's weird because I remember so much of the second half that I kind of forgot about the first half, which is just as good. In fact, if that's one thing I can say about the episode, it's that it's pure jokes. It's super funny throughout. And I can't think of one groaner in the whole thing. Zoidberg's wobbly body is so mesmerizing. And Zap Brannigan delivers, as always, some of the funniest lines. Besides the amazing jokes, there's also some really good sight gags too. Amy's tiny cell phone cracks me up. And the Jurassic Park homage, but instead of water, it's Zap's gut. And do I even have to bring up his singing? Perfect. Also, seeing the Amazon planet was really fun. And not just for the reasons you think, but yeah, for those reasons too. Let's just say that by the second half of the episode, I was feeling very scare-roused. But one of my favorite parts of the episode is how they tackle Kif's and Amy's relationship. Kif is such a bundle of nerves, and seeing how much Amy is really into him is really sweet, especially when she saves him, and the rest of the boys, from death by Snoo Snoo. A painful, if satisfying way to go. I've always liked Amy and Kif together, since I think they bring out the best in each other. Kif gets Amy to settle down and show that she's not all about sex or partying, but really just wants a nice guy to settle down with. And Amy gets Kif to cut loose and break out of his usual stiff persona. A really cute couple. All in all, this is a great episode, and I love catching it whenever it's on. It might not be among the very best episodes, but much like the Amazonian basketball team,
we know can dunk, but good fundamentals.
Which is just as fun to watch.
Number 44, The Lesser of Two Evils. Man, this episode is so funny. The entire beginning in the Pastorama exhibit has some great bits, but this one is my favorite.
Listen to that baby purr.
There's a baby in there, huh?
I guess it makes sense that sooner or later we would meet another bending unit, and I like that they give Flexo his own shtick that isn't too similar to Bender. Like, obviously they sound the same, but Flexo's little gimmick is that he's always getting super worked up about something and then walks it back immediately.
Well, that's 8 hours.
Yeah, 8 hours is solid boredom. Nah, I'm kidding. You're a wonderful man.
The big twist at the end of the episode is super effective and believable though, as they think Flexo stole the priceless atom, but it turns out to be Bender. Just a hilarious episode top to bottom. Number 43, Love's Labor's Lost in Space. The introduction of Zap Brannigan and Nibbler, and an incredibly funny episode. And who better to talk about it than one of my good friends, Offbeat Kiki. Take it away, Keeks.
Hey, I'm Offbeat Kiki, and I'm here to rank the episode Love's Labor's Lost in Space, the fourth episode of the series where the crew meets Zap Brannigan and Nibbler amidst Leela having trouble in her dating life. The first few episodes of a series are crucial to holding viewer interest and getting renewed, and I think this episode succeeded in that while giving Leela's character some focus and establishing a close bond between her, Bender, and Fry. My favorite parts were Zap Brannigan's love of Allure, Bender's physical gaydar, and the ethereal light being at the bar. The comedic timing is great, and the movement in the animation feels very nostalgic to me. I especially love the shot of Leela walking into Zap's bedroom. It feels like a solid B-tier episode. Thanks for having me, Johnny.
Number 42, A Bicyclops Built for Two. This episode was such a tease. It's set up to look like we're finally going to learn about Leela's origins, and the origins they lay out here are pretty funny in retrospect.
We are the last remaining Cyclopses. Our planet is Cyclopia. This is the capital, Cyclops City. Stop me if I'm going too fast for you.
I think a lot of people love this episode for its Married with Children gag, where after they get together, Leela and Alcazar basically play out a scene from that show, which is particularly fun because Katie Sagal starred in that show. The ending twist isn't particularly surprising, but it is super funny, revealing that Alcazar is a shape-shifting alien who's been grifting 5 different women. But teasing the Leela's origin stuff early made the ultimate reveal later in the series all the more satisfying. This is a good one. Number 41, Crimes of the Hot. This is probably the most blatant the show gets with their climate change messages. In fact, an animated sequence from this episode that explained global warming was actually used in Al Gore's documentary, Inconvenient Truth. But besides its messaging, the episode stands as an incredibly funny story. The big conflict is that they reveal robots' emissions are the main cause of the climate crisis, which leads to the government rounding up the robots and plan to eliminate them. I think my favorite aspect of this episode is the little sub-story with Bender and his turtle friend. The reveal that Bender can't get up when he's landed on his back is super funny, especially visually. But the moment in the end when Bender falls on his back as the robots attempt to use their exhaust ports to push the planet slightly further from the sun is surprisingly effective. Basically, it requires every robot on Earth to accomplish, but now on his back, Bender can't participate. But when he sees his turtle friend actually make a flip over to his front, Bender is inspired and makes it happen. I love it. Number 40, Xmas Story, the first Christmas episode, or Xmas episode. This is one that I really love. From the Conan O'Brien cameo at the beginning to the John Goodman performance as Robot Santa, it's just fun top to bottom. But this episode also represents a real turning point in Fry and Leela's relationship, showcasing the first time they really start to relate to each other. Fry laments the loss of his family during the holiday, but insensitively doesn't think about the fact that Leela never even had a family. I love that the way he tries to make it up to her is buying an animal. The difficulty choosing between the parrot and the stink lizards is super funny, but the fact that he chose the parrot is actually also just a terrible gift. Hey, I'm sorry, here's a huge responsibility for the literal rest of your life. But when Leela saves Fry as he tries to retrieve the parrot, they have this really nice heart-to-heart, and this is a moment I just love so much.
You're lonely and I'm lonely, but together, we're lonely together.
Beautiful moment, great episode. I love it. Number 39, Where No Fan Has Gone Before. You can tell that this episode was a huge deal for the Futurama staff, as they're all such huge Star Trek geeks. Their love for the franchise really comes through in the script, and every single Trek cast member gives great performances. Futurama is always filled with so much homage to Star Trek, so for them to actually get to make an episode with the cast and make it about Star Trek is so fun. And even though the continuity behind Star Trek being banned in the future doesn't really make sense, it's still a really funny setup. The whole premise actually feels very Star Trek, but with that fun metatextual Futurama twist. Melvar holding the entire cast hostage, basically to have in his personal collection, is very in tune with these types of fandoms.
Melvar has 3 L's.
I think I've done enough conventions to know how to spell Melvar.
This episode really shines because you can just tell how much it meant to the writers. It's hilarious, full of jokes for real Trek fans, and also works as a classic Futurama romp. Number 38, Stench and Stenchability. This episode is so damn sweet. One of the things that people don't recognize enough is that despite his gross nature, Zoidberg is actually one of the kindest people in Futurama. He's just a genuinely great person, and the world is always beating him down. So the fact that they gave him a happy ending in the penultimate episode of the entire series is just really great. And in the process, they continue to illustrate exactly why he's such a good person. Zoidberg starts dating this beautiful woman, Marianne, played by Amelia Clarke, and they have this amazing connection and relationship, partially because Marianne has no sense of smell and therefore can't smell Zoidberg's rank stench. But as a flower salesman, she dreams of smelling flowers, and Zoidberg risks his entire relationship to make her happy by fixing her sense of smell. It's beautiful, and since the show was ending, rather than just revert to the status quo at the end of the episode, they actually give Zoidberg his happy ending, revealing that even after her sense of smell is restored, she ends up hating the smell of flowers and loving the smell of Zoidberg. Great episode. Number 37, Space Pilot 3000. What is there to say about the pilot that hasn't been said? It's truly one of the best series pilots I've ever seen. It sets up the world and characters so effortlessly and brilliantly, and it manages to be incredibly funny the entire time. The way it sets up Fry within the cold open should be studied by all writers. Its economy of storytelling is perfectly balanced, and the introduction of the future itself perfectly pulls you into the show as a viewer, not to mention the way it sets up both Bender and Leela as well. I particularly love this little sequence near the end where Fry is basically given up and is just waiting for Leela to assign him his delivery boy career, the one that basically negates his entire fresh start in the year 3000. But Fry and Leela actually connect, as Fry laments the loss of everybody he's ever had in the year 2000. and Leela reveals that she was abandoned on Earth as a child and has no idea what galaxy she's from. This went such a long way to establish their connection and eventual romance, and it's a really sweet moment. Space Pilot 3000 is incredible. If you're writing a pilot, study this one. Number 36, the series has landed. And immediately after the pilot, the series actually one-upped itself with The Series Has Landed, which is just such a great follow-up. While the pilot introduces us to the world of tomorrow, The Series Has Landed takes us one step further out. No, we aren't heading on a big space adventure or going to an alien planet, just the moon. All of the humor surrounding the amusement park on the moon is so funny, especially because it looks like theme park tech hasn't improved much in 1,000 years.
We're whalers on the moon, we carry a harpoon.
But what's so smart about this is that to all the characters from the future, going to the moon is not all that big a deal. It takes a few moments, it's like a tourist trap, but to Fry, going to the moon is a huge deal. And the end of the episode, when they discover the moon landing site and he conveys what the moon means to him, to Leela, it's just a perfect Futurama moment.
The moon was like this awesome, romantic, mysterious thing, hanging up there in the sky where you could never reach it, no matter how much you wanted to.
It really is beautiful. I don't know why I never noticed before.
This is honestly one of the all-time great moments in the entire show, and it's a great episode. Number 35, ahead in the polls. The introduction of Futurama's Nixon, and one of my favorite Billy West performances. This episode makes me laugh so much. The entire concept of Bender selling his literal body to make a quick buck is so great, and Nixon then using that body as a loophole for why he can run for president again is genius.
But as you can plainly see, I've got a shiny new body.
And of course, Nixon actually winning the election and becoming the president of Earth, to me, is one of the funniest things in the entire world of Futurama. I also love his off-the-rails rant at the end of the episode.
And once I'm swept into office, I'll sell our children's organs to zoos for meat, and I'll go into people's houses at night and wreck up the place.
This is just a prime example of how funny this show can be. Number 34, 300 Big Boys. 300 Big Boys does not get enough love. This episode is not only super funny, but it does something that few other Futurama episodes have tried by tying so many individual stories into one larger narrative. When the entire planet gets a $300 tax rebate, we see exactly how everyone is spending their money. They balance every single story remarkably well, and all of them are hilarious. And the way they intertwine in the final sequence is really fun. Fry drinking that 100th cup of coffee and entering this state of hyperspeed bliss is amazing, and visually, the entire sequence is so cool. This one definitely deserves more attention. In fact, the only other episode in this entire series that tried to balance this many stories is actually the very next one on my list. Number 33, Prisoner of Benda. This is such a smart and fun episode, which showcases a device where characters can switch their bodies and minds. However, the problem is that two bodies that have switched are incapable of switching back, so they have to use other bodies to facilitate more mind swap. Ken Keeler actually wrote an entire peer-reviewed mathematical proof to make the mind switching work when returning everyone's minds back to their original bodies. But they also just have so much fun showcasing the misadventures the characters get up to in other bodies. Fry and Leela hooking up at a restaurant in Zoidberg and the Professor's bodies will always stand out to me as a hilarious moment, though maybe not as much as Washbucket confessing her love for Scruffy in Amy's body.
Oh, it would be sweet for a while, but in the back of our minds we'd know that I'm a man. And your janitorial equipment.
Add on the fact that this one heavily features the Globetrotters and their showboating razzmatazz algebra, and you've got yourself a classic episode. Easily one of my favorites from the revival era. Alright, on to the A tier. We're starting to get into the best this series has to offer, folks. Number 32, Anthology of Interest 2. One of the best anthology episodes Futurama has to offer. Anthology of Interest 2 delivers two incredible and hilarious what-if scenarios, and one more that is very solid. I Meatbag is a classic segment as Bender goes through reverse fossilization to become human. Unfortunately, Bender isn't prepared at all for the responsibility of having a human body and partakes in the most excessive lifestyle imaginable.
I bet I can eat nachos and go to the bathroom at the same time.
The montage sequence set to Conga by Gloria Estefan is so funny, as is the reveal at the end that Bender has eaten himself into basically a human wrecking ball. I particularly love when he convinces everyone to try and live like he does. Great stuff. Raiders of the Lost Arcade is another classic, though I'm not entirely sure it delivers on its what-if question of what if life were like a video game, as much as it asks what if life had a bunch of characters and elements from these video games, but it's hilarious either way. Plus it delivers this classic line.
It's Saturday night. I have no date, a 2-liter bottle of Shasta, and my all-rush mixtape. Let's rock.
I can't play it, but there's a great needle drop into Rush's Tom Sawyer there. Excellent segment. The final sequence is a straight-up Wizard of Oz parody, which I think is the weak link, though it still has some really great moments. I think the funniest thing about the episode is the professor's solution to Zoidberg's lack of courage.
Who needs courage when you have a gun?
It's also interesting that this is actually a dream Leela has rather than a real what-if question in the what-if machine, which is actually a clever little detail because if Leela had been able to ask the what-if machine, she probably would have learned the truth about her parents right then and there. Anyways, great episode. Number 31, Overclockwise. This episode was the series' third ever attempt at a series finale, and it is a very strong entry. Revolving around Bender overclocking his processor, and both Cupert and the Professor being prosecuted for violating the terms of service on their bending unit, this one has some really beautiful and creative sequences, particularly when Bender becomes this sort of computer god. It's got some great laughs, some fun sci-fi execution, and of course, the classic pull at the heartstrings moment to cap it off, as Fry and Leela read their future together. If I had one complaint about this episode, it's that when Leela decides to leave Planet Express, she disappears from the episode entirely, and if the series had ended on a largely Leela-less episode, I would have been pretty disappointed. Number 30, Cold Warriors. The third in the series of episodes all about Fry's past, and a great entry. This one is all about Fry and his father Yancey. The story jumps between the future and the late 80s, showing Fry's relationship with his father as a child. The past showcases Fry's attempts to win a science fair by studying the common cold, while the future storyline is about Fry actually catching the common cold, which basically threatens a major pandemic since the cold has been eradicated in the future. There are some really cool visual sequences in the cold quarantine storyline, particularly when the Nimbus tractor beams all of Manhattan and attempts to hurl it into the sun, but the core of this episode is definitely Fry's storyline with his father in the 80s. It's set up to be this major vindicating storyline where Fry proves his father wrong and beats the smart kid in class in the science fair. But though he tried his hardest, Fry fails, and it feels like he's just proven his father right. I especially like the way that they tie this to the future cold quarantine storyline, as they use his science fair rival Josh Gedge's experiment to create a vaccine for the common cold. But the best moment is the end of the episode as we see Fry sitting with his father as they ice fish, Fry shivering from having fallen into the frozen lake. His father tells him that the reason he's so hard on him is because he wants him to grow up to be resilient.
Someday, you may face adversity so preposterous I can't even conceive of them.
This recontextualizes Yancey's seeming indifference throughout the episode and gives a really beautiful father-son moment between the pair of them. Yancey is mostly portrayed as an overly serious buffoon throughout his appearances in the show, and this quiet moment of emotion and reflection is another great tearjerker. Plus, it ends on this clever little line.
Now bundle up. I don't want you getting frozen.
Number 29, Lethal Inspection. The first real home run of Futurama's Comedy Central era was Lethal Inspection, an excellent adventure focusing on Bender and Hermes. When Bender learns he doesn't have a backup unit and is therefore mortal, he goes on a quest to confront the mysterious Inspector 5 and question why he allowed him to leave the factory without a backup unit. The unlikely pairing of Hermes and Bender works so well in this episode. Hermes is a character who deserved more development in general, and pairing him with Bender was a fun way to do this. And though when they start, Bender is seemingly skeptical of Hermes' pencil-pushing bureaucratic ways, the pair form an unlikely friendship filled with really nice moments.
Hermes, remember that flock of bats?
I sure do.
That was fun.
When they can't solve the Inspector 5 mystery, Bender has an existential meltdown, and in a beautiful little moment, Hermes helps calm him down.
You are Bender, which is something Inspector 5 will never be.
But the real doozy comes at the end of the episode. Bender accepts his fate as a mortal being, but it's then revealed that Hermes was Inspector 5 all along. He burns the proof, and we flash back to see Hermes inspecting an adorable baby Bender at the robot factory. Hermes doesn't have the heart to dispose of this cutie, and lets him leave the factory without a backup unit for that reason. This is all set to a song called Little Bird by Elizabeth Mitchell, and it is outrageously effective as one of Futurama's patented heartstring tugging endings. Just a classic episode in every sense. Number 28, Brannigan Begin Again. This is just a true classic with some incredible comedic moments. Zap Brannigan's obsession with Leela causes him to detain the Planet Express crew, which leads to him neglecting his ribbon-cutting duties at the new Dupe headquarters. He decides to use his ship's laser instead, destroying the massive expensive space station in the process. Zap is then court-martialed and stripped of his rank. This is also the introduction of one of my favorite side characters, the Hyper Chicken. Farnsworth foolishly hires Zap at Planet Express, and he gets the entire crew to mutiny against Leela. There are so many funny aspects to the story. Kiff's absolute relief serving under a competent captain, Zap's complete obsession with hating the neutral planet, and of course the neutral planet itself.
If I don't survive, tell my wife hello.
There are just so many clever and hilarious moments throughout.
Maybe not to you, Kiff, but if I recall correctly, you were court-martialed in disgrace. Ooh, burn!
Any episode that features tons of Zapp Brannigan is guaranteed to be at least somewhat funny, but this might be the funniest Zapp Brannigan-centric episode the show has to offer. But is it the funniest episode the series has to offer?
All I know is my gut says maybe.
Number 27, Fry and the Slurm Factory. I'm generally not as big of a fan of episodes that are straight up parodies of other properties, but this one is definitely an exception. Fry and the Slurm Factory is another certified classic, rounding out the first production season in a really fun way. The Willy Wonka parody is obvious, but they introduce such funny subversions of the idea. The fact that Slurms Mackenzie is contractually obligated to party and is constantly exhausted is so funny.
I'm gonna go lie down.
The Grunkalunkas are great Oompa Loompa parodies.
Grunkalunka dunkity ingredient. You should not ask about the secret ingredient.
Okay, we get the point.
But the major twist that Slurm isn't a soda at all, but a byproduct excreted by giant space slugs, is just pure Futurama absurdity. Disgusting and hilarious. And Fry still guzzling down Slurm even after learning the secret is perfect. Excellent episode. Number 26, Teenage Mutant Leela's Hurdles. I love Teenage Mutant Leela's Hurdles. And not just because it's fun to say the name. This is probably the one episode that does an incredible job exploring Leela's relationship with her parents after that major reveal. A couple of episodes make valiant efforts like Less Than Hero and Zap Dingbat, but this is the one that really nails it. When the entire crew de-ages in a spa accident, Leela actually decides that she wants to remain a teenager and live an actual childhood with her parents. It does such a great job showcasing Leela's grief over her lost childhood and the lengths she would go to retain it, even if it means upending her entire life. Love me a good Leela-centric episode. It's also just fun to see the younger versions of the characters. One of my favorite moments is when Hermes and Dwight, now the same age, just share a laugh together like they're brothers. Not to mention this episode features Pazuzu, everyone's favorite French gargoyle. Overall, not just an incredibly funny episode, but a meaningful exploration of Leela as a character. Number 25, iRoommate. This is only the third episode of the entire series, and I love it. This showcases Fry's struggles to find a place to live after being unfrozen in the future, with Bender coming along for the ride to be his roommate. Infamously, this episode was noted to death by Fox back in the day, and it was the only time that the crew relented to the demands, giving them mostly what they asked for. And what did Fox think of iRoommate after all of their notes?
Worst episode ever.
Now, I actually really love this episode, but it's so funny to me that Fox whined about how they were writing Futurama until they got their way, and then hated what they saw. I think that the staff wrote around Fox's demands in a really smart and clever way. This episode proved that the series was capable of telling funny, clever stories that didn't rely on science fiction concepts. The intercharacter comedy and drama worked beautifully, even in a plot as simple as let's find an apartment. This episode also introduces All My Circuits, which to this day I am convinced should be a full series. Let's get it trending. Hashtag bring back All My Circuits. My favorite moment in the episode is after Fry is sort of a shitty friend to Bender. The two make up in a way that parallels the scene in All My Circuits. But because they're just copying the show, Bender actually apologizes to Fry.
You're my best friend, Fry. I'm sorry I treated you so badly.
Apology accepted. After all, you're only human.
But the miracle of this moment is that even though you're laughing at the joke of it all, it still somehow works as an effective emotional moment between the pair. It's like magic. Number 24, Bender's Big Score. The first Futurama movie and final to show up on this list. And it's one that I think's a certified banger. Bender's Big Score was everything I hoped for out of a Futurama movie. It felt big and cinematic, and it also brought us back into the world of tomorrow after a years-long hiatus. The story is clever, funny, heart-wrenching, and subversive in the best ways, especially the Lars Fillmore storyline, which sees a time paradox duplicate of Fry win Leela's heart, though nobody knows that he's a Fry duplicate except Lars himself. I've talked about this a lot in other videos, but the story of Lars is great because it shows the type of developmental maturity that Fry needs to win over Leela. But even more interestingly, Lars' intercession in the timeline actually propels our Fry's development forward as well, and we see the change in our Fry much sooner in his timeline than Lars' development in his own timeline. And this wouldn't have happened if Lars hadn't entered the picture. It's just a nice little bit of writing, and I like it. The movie also just gets better on rewatch. Once you've got the story of Lars in your head, you can really appreciate the time he spends with Leela. My favorite scene is this date montage the pair go on, which also features some genius foreshadowing as they nearly die at every turn, which is hinting that Lars is a doomed time paradox duplicate. Overall, just an incredible Futurama story. I love it to death, and I always will. Number 23, Hell is Other Robots. Another season 1 classic. This is a really fun and interesting episode. Weirdly, this episode's 3 acts all feel incredibly distinct, which I normally wouldn't be a huge fan of, but they all work so well that it doesn't really bother me. The first act is Bender becoming addicted to jacking on with electricity, basically robot drugs. This sends Bender into the gutter, sometimes literally. The second act shows Bender replace this addiction with religion, which also has some really fun and funny moments.
No poison for us, thanks.
But when Fry and Leela get Bender re-addicted to sleazy behavior, he's taken straight to robot hell. The real highlight is Robot Hell itself, which is beautifully designed and also features Dan Castellaneta in an excellent performance as the Robot Devil. It's hard not to love this song.
Cigars are evil, you won't miss them.
Okay, I can't play too much of the song, but it's great. This is one of the best episodes of Season 1 for sure, and I love it. Number 22, A Fish Full of Dollars. Another Season 1 episode that I absolutely love. Much like I, Roommate, this one showcases how funny the show can be without overly relying on science fiction. This is basically a what if an idiot won the lottery type of sitcom story, as Fry learns that his meager savings have compounded massive interest over 1,000 years. It's so funny to me that the first thing Fry does is just pick up his life where he left off, watching videotapes of old TV he missed, but let's be real, I might do that too. It also introduces some funny concepts like advertising and dreams, which felt super dystopian at the time, but now feels 100% like something marketing teams can and will pursue. This also introduces Mom, and I really like the way they used her in earlier episodes. We as the audience see that she's secretly evil, but the characters don't learn this fact until much later in the series. It's a fun dynamic. They treat her like this sweet old lady, even though we know she's been pulling the strings working against Fry the entire episode.
Dumbass. What a nice lady.
The fact that the entire conflict revolves around anchovies is pretty funny too, with Fry owning the last tin in existence so he can share his favorite pizza topping with his friends.
No one likes him at first, but they'll grow on.
I'm also a huge fan of the plan that Mom and her sons use to try and get Fry's PIN number, which they know is the price of a pizza and a large soda at Panucci's Pizza. The payoff is perfect.
1077. Same as my PIN number.
Classic Season 1 episode. Number 21, Bendin' in the Wind. The Beck episode. I seriously love this one, and not just because it introduced me to the music of Beck, who has become one of my favorite artists. I've even seen him live a couple times, but this one also plays on an aspect of Bender that I feel went a tad underexplored, the fact that he secretly wants to be a folk singer. It's also just a pretty fun setup for an episode that once again doesn't overly rely on sci-fi. It's just a good old-fashioned hippie road trip episode as the crew follows Beck and co around in a van. I love that Beck is pretty much just down to make fun of himself, and according to the commentary, he not only was game for the self-deprecation, but even suggested some jokes of his own.
Like when I wrote Devil's Haircut, I was feeling really... What's that song about?
It also has this awesome little piece of animation when Bender is dancing around on stage. It's so smooth. More of this. Number 20, A Big Piece of Garbage. My favorite Season 1 episode, and this is one they actually submitted to the Emmys. There's actually some For Your Consideration VHS tapes with this episode on it out there, and yes, I am constantly considering dropping hundreds of dollars to purchase it, because I have a problem. This is a great episode that weaves Futurama's pro-environmental messages seamlessly with its sci-fi fun. It turns our modern society's penchant for waste into a wild Armageddon parody. Plus, it introduces the smelloscope and probably delivers the funniest ever Uranus joke.
Astronomers renamed Uranus in 2620 to end that stupid joke once and for all.
Oh, what's it called now?
Eurectum.
Even the solution is a smart and funny piece of commentary where they create an equally large ball of garbage to deflect the original away from Earth, meaning that a future generation will have to deal with that ball of garbage. While this episode doesn't feature a heartstring pulling moment the show is often lauded for, I think this represents everything else about Futurama that makes it special. It's an absolutely hilarious sci-fi concept that weaves itself into smart social commentary in a way that doesn't feel preachy. It's just great writing. Number 19, The Day the Earth Stood Stupid. While this was a story arc I wish had continued a little bit further, I'll always love and appreciate the 2-episode story about Fry and the Brain Spawn. Not only was this just a really engaging aspect of Futurama's overall story, but it also did something that other adult animated cartoons like Futurama weren't really willing to try: introduce significant serialized aspects to its storytelling. This is also just full of funny science fiction, with the Brain Spawn making everyone on Earth dumb as they aim to consume all knowledge and destroy the planet.
Ow! Fire hot!
The prophecy will help. Ah, fire indeed hot.
I really love the concept that the Brain Spawn can insert your mind into books. It was fun to see Fry run through various historical pieces of literature. Side note, this was actually also a really cool plot device used in the Simpsons Futurama crossover comics, as the Brain Spawn inserted the Planet Express crew into some old Simpsons comics. This is just a great episode, and introducing the larger story behind Fry's journey to the future goes a long way for me. Number 18, Jurassic Bark. Alright, some of you may be upset that this isn't higher on the list, and for a long time, this was my favorite episode of Futurama, and while I do still absolutely love it, I think the heart-wrenching ending actually overshadows the rest of the episode in a lot of ways. But don't get me wrong, this is an absolute classic ep, and I love it dearly. They always do such a great job with these flashback episodes that take place half in the future and half in Fry's time in the past. The introduction of Seymour is just so charming, it's impossible not to love the little dude. It also plays up Bender's insecurities in a fun way, as he just gets ridiculously jealous of the time Fry is spending preparing to get his dog back, which is vintage Bender. The dude is full of himself, but he's also so self-conscious and insecure about himself, and seeing that play out in his relationship with Fry is really fun. Plus, there's Robo-Puppy.
Robo-Puppy mistreatment alert! Robo-Puppy mistreatment alert!
And of course, that ending beat is without a doubt one of the saddest moments in television history. After Fry decides that Seymour must have lived a long, happy life without him, it's revealed that he actually waited in front of Panucci's Pizza for Fry to return until he died. Absolutely devastating. If I had any complaint about this part of the episode, it's that the Seymour reveal really didn't have any connection to the larger themes or ideas in the episode. One of its sister episodes, The Luck of the Fryrish, which I'll talk about later, manages a comparably emotional ending beat that actually ties to the episode at large in a much more effective way. The reveal that Seymour died at an older age, and then further reveal that he waited for Fry, is all executed at the very last moment. It wasn't really hinted at in any other way, and it doesn't really tie to the themes of the Fry-Bender story happening in the future, which is why in the end, this ended up slipping down my list quite a ways. But that isn't to say it's bad, it's still an absolutely incredible episode, and the power of its ending beat is undeniable. I have never gotten through the ending without crying. Number 17, The Why of Fry. So here's the finale of the Fry/Brainspawn storyline, another excellent episode that not only follows up The Day the Earth Stood Stupid in a really effective way, but it also ties in some of the other hilarious storylines they introduced, like Fry becoming his own grandfather in Roswell That Ends Well. The return of the Brainspawn was incredibly effective. They did a great job reintroducing them as villains while also escalating their threat. The Death Star-like infosphere is a really cool design, and also the perfect name for my favorite Futurama wiki. But obviously the meat of the conflict comes with the reveal that Nibbler was the one who pushed Fry into the freezer tube all along, knowing that he was the only one who could stop the Brainspawn in the future. The devastation seen in Fry as he realizes that the most important thing that happened to him in his lifetime wasn't just happenstance, it was deliberately done to him against his will, is really well executed. Billy West's line delivery here is just heartbreaking.
What is one life weighed against the entire universe?
But it was my life.
Okay, look, and I'm not going to talk about how Nibbler mentions Leela as being the other again, but if the fact that they never follow that up bothers you as much as it did me, make sure to check out the video I made about it. The ending beat is incredible too, when Leela is so happy to see Fry after her terrible date, and tells him it doesn't matter if he isn't the most important person in the universe, it makes her happy just to see him.
Then I am the most important person in the universe.
And while, as I mentioned before, I wish the storyline had continued beyond the second episode or been extended into a larger arc, especially after Nibbler tells Fry they'll need his help again at the end, I still love what they managed to do in these two episodes. Really fun and effective storytelling that we hadn't really seen in this genre before. Number 16, The Problem with Poplars. Before I became obsessed with Futurama entirely, this was what I considered to be the quintessential episode. Like, when I thought about Futurama, I thought about The Problem with Poplars. It's just an incredibly funny episode. I still remember the entire Poplar theme song. Look, here's me and Tariq singing about it in our podcast.
Pop a
poplar in your mouth when you come to Fishy Joe's. What they're made of is a mystery where they come from. No one knows. Also, listen to cartoons that curse. This episode features so many fun side characters, including Lur of the planet Omicron Persei 8, Zap Brannigan, and of course the introduction of the Waterfall family with Free Waterfall Jr. Look, I don't even eat meat, but naming your PETA parody organization Mankind for Ethical Animal Treatment, or MEAT, is genius. Pure comedy. The big twist that Poplars are actually the offspring of the Omicronians is funny, gross, and surprising, and overall this is just good old classic Futurama. Number 15, Insane in the Mainframe. This is an episode that I think is truly underrated, as a court mandate sends Fry to a robot mental asylum alongside Bender, since the human asylum is full. The array of hilarious characters in the Institute are so funny.
He's got multiple personalities, all of them Lincoln.
I was born in 200 log cabins.
This episode also introduces Roberto, who is one of my absolute favorite robots in the entire show. It's without a doubt one of my favorite voices to imitate. Seriously so much fun, especially when you need to. Stand back, I'm gonna practice my stabbing.
No, please!
I really think this episode deserves more credit for how funny it is. Big fan. Number 14, Reincarnation. This is the one anthology episode from the revival seasons that I love, and boy do I love it. I even think it outshines the classic anthology of interest episodes. The obvious draw is the incredible animation, as each anthology segment reimagines Futurama in a different animation style. The first is gorgeous, taking us back to classic Disney Steamboat Willie style animation. There are sequences in here that are truly gorgeous. The second showcases a pixel art video game style animation, and it looks really cool. And the last is easily the most fun as it goes full anime. I think the anime style is most fun because they really lean into that style of storytelling in a ridiculous and exaggerated way. But I think the most clever thing about this episode is how each segment features something that the selected animation style is actually incapable of showcasing. The solution in the Disney style segment is that they discover a new color, which obviously can't be shown in black and white. The pixel art discovers what the smallest piece of matter in existence is, the building block of the entire universe, but can't showcase it in detail because it just looks like a pixel. And the anime segment features an elaborate dance routine from Dr. Zoidberg that isn't able to be animated in the limited style they utilized. Very clever stuff. Number 13, Leela's Homeworld. Now, this is an absolute classic. After 4 seasons of build-up, we finally meet Leela's parents alongside the reveal that she was never actually an alien, but a mutant. The least mutated mutant of all time, actually. I love this episode and even did an entire video about it, but I can't sing its praises enough. It was subversive and clever, and also revealed that the reason her parents abandoned her was actually selfless. With mutants being second-class citizens in New York, which is pretty fucked up, let's be real, they realized that Leela could actually pass for a non-mutant on the surface. The reason they left her at the orphanarium and gave up their only child was because they knew she would live a better, more fruitful life than she could in the sewers. And not to mention the final montage, one of my favorite moments in the entire series, as we see that all along her parents were actually secretly there, keeping a watchful eye on her where they could. Beautiful heartstring pulling sequence, incredible episode. Number 12, Future Stock. This episode just stands out as one of the absolute funniest to me. The concept of a skeezy 80s businessman taking over Planet Express is just hilarious, and in execution, it's even better. They don't even refer to him by name the entire episode, they just call him that guy. But that guy teaching Fry his sleazy business practices is some of my favorite stuff in the episode.
I'm worried about blank.
Don't you worry about blank. Let me worry about blank.
Especially the payoff here.
Fry, we're worried about Planet Express.
Don't you worry about Planet Express. Let me worry about blank.
It's just such a silly premise with so many funny moments. I particularly love the ending where the crew realizes they're going to be rich after that guy sells Planet Express to Mom, while Fry's speech makes the share price of the company wildly fluctuate. Just a really funny concept. Great stuff. All right, folks, we've finally made it. This is the S tier, the creme de la creme. These are my absolute favorite episodes of Futurama, and I believe not only the best the show has to offer, but some of the best television ever made. The show overall isn't perfect, but these episodes, they are. Let's get into it. Number 11, How Hermes Requisitioned His Groove Back. This is my favorite episode from season 2, and it's a real gem. Hilarious through and through, and features probably the best song in the entire series. The episode sees Hermes put on forced paid vacation. He's replaced by a higher-ranked bureaucrat named Morgan Proctor, who changes things at Planet Express drastically. But hilariously, Morgan's overly organized bureaucratic nature makes dirtiness her biggest kink, so who else is she attracted to but Philip J. Fry?
Why is there yogurt in this cap?
I can explain that. See, it used to be milk and, well, time makes fools of us all.
The entire premise is just so funny to me. Morgan is a hilarious one-off character, and the ways she forces changes upon the Planet Express crew makes for some very funny drama. And I also love that it showcases how vital Hermes is to Planet Express, as even a more highly ranked bureaucrat seems incapable of properly balancing the company's weird array of characters. Bender discovers Morgan and Fry's secret romance, so Morgan removes his memory card and sends it off to the central bureaucracy, which makes the final act a rescue mission as they try to find Bender's personality amidst the largest disorganized pile of junk you've ever seen, which is where Hermes comes in to save the day. Not only is the song so funny, but the animation here is great. It's so well choreographed, and it's one of the most perfect segments in all of Futurama. Plus, the song just lives in my head rent-free, because when push comes to shove, you gotta do what you love, even if it's not a good idea.
They said I probably shouldn't be a surgeon.
They poo-pooed my electric frankfurter.
They said I probably shouldn't fly with just one eye.
I am Bender. Please insert girder. An all-timer. Number 10, Meanwhile. The ultimate and final series finale, and a true masterpiece. Meanwhile, not only delivers an incredible and heartfelt story surrounding Fry and Leela's relationship, but it does so in such a beautiful and thoughtful package, all through a classic sci-fi premise. When Leela goes through a near-death experience at Lunar Park, Fry decides it's time to propose. He uses a button created by Farnsworth that sends its users back in time 10 seconds to steal a bunch of beautiful diamonds for Leela's engagement ring, and then asks Leela to meet him at the Vampire State Building at sunset if she agrees to his proposal. When she doesn't show up on time, Fry jumps off the building, not wanting to live without Leela, before realizing that his watch was actually wrong because he'd been using the time button. Fry uses the button once more, but unfortunately, he jumped more than 10 seconds prior, forcing him into a perpetually falling time loop. This premise is dark, but man, it's cool, and I love the visual of Fry falling and reappearing at the top of the building over and over again. Fortunately for Fry, the professor recognizes what's happening, and the crew makes their way to Fry while protected in a time-proof shelter. They manage to save Fry, but destroy the button in the process. The professor is shredded across the time stream, and time is frozen in place except for Fry and Leela. The following sequence is one of my favorites in all of Futurama, and it brings catharsis to the series-long buildup of Fry and Leela's relationship. The catharsis that wasn't quite present in the previous Futurama finales.
That makes me feel angry!
Fry and Leela grow old together, traveling the frozen world and never tiring of one another. It's beautiful, but I think what's best about this sequence is just the entire frozen in time concept. The way that it literally takes a snapshot of the world we know and love, the world we've been invested in since 1999. It allows us one last chance to sit in and appreciate that world for all its intricacies. One last chance to live in Futurama before it ends forever. There's a lot of debate over what the end of the episode means, as the professor finds a way to fix the time freeze and claims that it will send them back to before he conceived of the time button. Many argue that it means the entire series is in a perpetual loop, especially because as soon as the series finale finished back in 2013, Comedy Central immediately aired the pilot episode. But I think there's some wiggle room there since conceived of the time button is so vague. Either way, I love that it left us with something to debate, and the more important aspect of the ending to me is the final interaction between Fry and Leela. After living an entire lifetime together happily, they're asked to go back, which would erase their experience from their memories, but also give them a chance to do it all again.
What do you say? Want to go around again?
I do.
It's such a perfect ending. This episode is top tier, and it's a perfect finale. I love it. Number 9, Roswell That Ends Well.
What smells like blue?
This is an absolute classic and the very first of 2 Emmy wins for Futurama. Roswell That Ends Well is just a genius concept. When the Planet Express crew is launched backwards in time, we learn that the infamous Roswell UFO crash of 1947 was actually the Planet Express ship. It's just such a smart and hilarious premise, but the episode really succeeds in its humor in all regards. The professor and Leela try to find a microwave so they can modify it and get back to the future. I love how Leela tries to talk like Fry, expecting the lingo to be the same.
Yo, Holmes, we're looking for a microwave oven.
Bender's body is recovered by the US government, as is Zoidberg.
Hello.
And of course, Fry foolishly attempts to keep his grandfather out of harm's way, out of a misguided fear that he will cease to exist. In doing so, he literally kills his own grandfather, and then when his grandmother comes onto him, he comes to a pretty foolish conclusion.
I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't even exist. But I do exist, which proves you can't really be my grandma.
So yes, Fry sleeps with his own grandmother, becoming his own grandfather. This is just a prime example of how Futurama is willing to break sci-fi logic in order to deliver a funnier story, especially because they actually tie this into Fry's ongoing story with the brain spawn, later revealing that this act is the reason Fry lacks a delta brainwave, making him immune to the brain spawn's dumbification and creating the entire reason that Nibbler sends him to the future in the first place. I can't really say enough about how fun this episode is, and it makes so much sense that it won the Emmy. Futurama is a great show, but this is very much a premise that is easily recognizable by general audiences as incredibly clever. Overall, it's one of the funniest the show has to offer, it's one of the smartest premises in Futurama history, and it ties into the greater serialized story of the series in a really fun way. Nearly everything I want out of a Futurama episode. Number 8, Godfellas. This is just another ingenious episode. When Bender is accidentally launched through space at a high speed, he travels too fast for the crew to catch up with him, sending him on a lonely existential journey through the void of space. On his journey, he's hit with a space rock that yields life, who begin to worship Bender as their metal lord. Granted, we saw something similar in The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, written by David X. Cohen no less, but the way this was tackled in Futurama is nothing short of beautiful. Bender learns how difficult it is to be praised and put on a pedestal, and that when everyone in existence is relying on you, it's really difficult to make everyone happy. He asks the tiny people to build him a brewery so he can drink alcohol and continue to function as a robot. The construction kills and maims countless people, and the alcohol industry attracts organized crime. When he learns there are also tiny people on his backside that he's been ignoring, the two sides of him go to war. It's just a really well plotted little story within the larger story. After everyone on Bender dies, he actually meets God, and I've got to say I just love this nebula design. But I think my favorite aspect of this episode is how it leans into Bender's insecurities throughout the series. He's so fixated on being remembered or leaving a mark on society, being seen as important or meaningful, and in his time being a literal god to an entire group of folks, he fails miserably. But the way he's able to get home is actually through the connections and meaning he's already crafted in his life, through his friendship with Fry, who never stops searching for Bender. Fry's words echo across space and catch God's attention.
I wish I had Bender back.
Only through his connection to Fry is Bender able to be sent back to Earth and escape the existential void of space. It's a really nice, thought-provoking episode. Number 7, The Late Philip J. Fry. This is without a doubt the best episode of the revival era, and it rightfully won the show its second Emmy. The Late Philip J. Fry is an absolute masterpiece. I've actually talked about it way too much on this channel already. In fact, my very first Futurama video was on this episode specifically, and y'all enjoyed that one apparently. The episode starts by focusing on how Fry's persistent lateness disappoints Leela. He attempts to make it up to her with a birthday dinner at Cavern on the Green, but he's roped into testing the professor's forward-traveling time machine with Farnsworth and Bender. As he's recording his birthday card for her, the machine is flung forward into the future, making it seem like he abandoned Leela to go to Hedonism Bot's party. To make matters worse, there's a huge explosion at that party, leading the crew to believe that the trio has died. The rest of the episode focuses on two parallel stories. One is Fry, Bender, and the professor continuing to move forward in time until they can find backwards time-traveling technology to return home, and the other shows Leela's time as the new head of Planet Express and subsequent success the company saw under her leadership. This is an incredibly effective storytelling structure. I love how it brings the show to completely new places in both timelines. By traveling far into the future, we get to see all kinds of new settings that we otherwise haven't gotten to see, and in Leela's timeline, we get to see more familiar possibilities for the future of Planet Express, New York, and the remaining characters. But the highlight of the episode is still Fry and Leela. Fry tries desperately to get back to see Leela, while Leela spends her entire life angry at Fry for abandoning her. And though she sees massive career success, she always pines for her lost love story. When Fry's birthday card flies out of the time stream and hits her in the back of the head, it clears everything up, making her feel even worse for her lifelong resentment.
My whole life I've been mad at him, and it wasn't his fault.
Leela walks to Cavern on the Green. She blasts a message into the ceiling, creating stalagmites over time. Meanwhile, in the year 1 billion, Fry discovers the message.
Dear Fry, our time together was short, but it was the best time of my life.
I cannot overstate how incredibly effective this reveal is. We literally see that Leela achieves massive success in her lifetime, bringing Planet Express to new heights under her leadership, and even still, the best time in her life was the time she spent with Fry. And this is what Fry needed to hear to realize that even if they can't get home, he still got to spend that important time with Leela. And that's what life is about. The final sequence of the episode is really amazing too, especially visually, as they watch the death and rebirth of the universe as the new Big Bang creates an identical universe after theirs, allowing the trio to place themselves back into place in the timeline in that new universe. The episode delivers absolutely everything I want in a Futurama episode. It's incredibly funny, driven by an excellent sci-fi premise with a real focus on the characters' interpersonal relationships. And of course, it's got one of the most effective and incredible heartstring-tugging moments in the series. An all-time classic for sure. Number 6, the Farnsworth Parabox. I think as far as pure sci-fi premises go, the Farnsworth Parabox might be the best episode of Futurama. Almost a precursor to shows like Rick and Morty, the professor creates a box containing a parallel universe. The episode is not only really fun in its premise, but incredibly funny too, as the crew meets parallel versions of themselves and sees how their lives could have been different. Bender chose a gold finish, the professor tried to remove his own brain, and of course the big one, Fry and Leela are married. Which leads to one of my my favorite jokes in the entire show that I think about constantly. When alternate Fry says that 1 year after their first date, he gave Leela a diamond scrunchie and they were married.
1 year later, I got beat up at a Neil Diamond concert by a guy named Scrunchy.
I can't say enough about how much I enjoy this episode. The characters interacting with their alternate selves is always funny, and it's easily one of my favorite premises in the entire run. It's a quintessential classic episode coming right at the end of the original run.
Will you go out with me?
Access denied.
Number 5, Time Keeps on Slippin'. Oh boy, do I love Time Keeps on Slippin'. The series' first foray into any type of time manipulation, as they initially opted not to do time travel. Ironically, their eventual 2 Emmy wins would both come from time travel episodes. But this was a good way to dip their toes into the time travel water, which features time skips launching the cast forward in time at random variables, though they of course can't remember what happens during the time skips. This episode is not only fun in that sci-fi premise, but it has such an absurdly funny setup that shouldn't work, but just does. Basically, the Harlem Globetrotters, who have their own planet in the future, come to Earth to challenge the entire planet to a game of basketball. Farnsworth uses something called chronotons to quickly grow a super mutant basketball team, which ends up causing the time skips. The fact that this episode is built around a Space Jam-esque Globetrotter game is so damn funny to me. Especially Bender's obsession with becoming a Globetrotter himself. It's always funny when Bender has random-ass dreams like folksing and cooking and basketball. But the real heart of the episode revolves, of course, around Fry and Leela, as during one of the time skips, the pair get married. But having missed the events of the time skip, Leela doesn't know what actually made her fall for Fry, and they immediately get divorced. The ending beat of the episode shows Fry realize that he literally moved the stars themselves to spell out a message: "I love you, Leela." Unfortunately, it's immediately destroyed in order to stop the time skips. I don't think any other show could have possibly made the Globetrotters whistling as sad as this does. Number 4, Parasites Lost. Somehow Futurama took a very commonly parodied story, The Fantastic Voyage, and made it completely their own. Not only is this just an amazing and unique take on this premise, but it's one of the best episodes the show has to offer. One of the things I love most about this episode is the way they subvert the worm storyline. Rather than parasites negatively affecting Fry or turning him into some kind of monster like many sci-fi stories opt to do, they actually improve him in nearly every way, which of course leads to Leela falling for him. I also can't say enough about the concept of the holophoner. This is one of my favorite inventions in all of Futurama, an instrument that creates holograms. Obviously there's no way for this to be a real thing, but god, I really wish it were. It would for sure be the instrument of choice among psychedelic drug users. But I think the best part of this episode is the choice that Fry makes in the end. After Leela tells him that she loves what he's become, he rethinks this entire parasites thing. He fears that he took a developmental shortcut, and that Leela doesn't love Fry for Fry, but for the parasites. Fry sacrifices his newfound better life because he wants to become the person Leela wants on his own. And man, do I love that message. This is an absolute classic episode, and I adore it. Number 3, The Devil's Hands Are Idle Playthings. The original series finale, The Devil's Hands Are Idle Playthings, is an absolute triumph. And while I think that Meanwhile works better as a series finale, this, to me, is the superior episode. But I've actually talked about this episode a ton already in both my videos about the 4 series finales, as well as my Fox era retrospective. So for this video, I'm actually going to throw one last time to my man Tariq, who loves this episode nearly as much as I do, if not more. Take it away, Tariq.
Yo, I promise, yo, this is the last time y'all gonna hear from me, yo, I promise. The Devil's Hands Are Idle Playthings. Fuck, man, what can I even say? Fry switches hands with the robot devil and is suddenly great at the holophoner. So good, in fact, that Buddy is commissioned to create an entire opera, and he decides to base the joint on Leela. But then, the robot devil strategically organizes for Leela to be deafened by Bender, and manipulates her into signing her hand away in marriage in exchange for a pair of ears so she can actually hear the opera. This is all top tier, man. This episode is relentlessly clever, hilarious, heartfelt, and it just feels gigantic. The climax of the episode is confusingly brilliant. Just a big opera performance of all the characters getting bigger and bigger, building bigger and bigger until the final gut punch of Fry just getting his hands chopped off. Man, is this shit good. But I think the best and most enchanting thing about this episode is that it reminds you of what Futurama can do. It takes every element of the show that we all loved and wrapped it into a frustratingly good bow. There's a lot of episodes of this show that I love and will continue to go to bat for the rest of my life. if necessary. But this episode right here reminds every single one of us that there will never be another Futurama. And honestly, the only tragic thing about the show coming back and continuing after this is that it stops this right here from being probably the best last line of dialogue in any series finale.
Please don't stop playing, Fry. I want to hear how it ends.
Number 2, The Luck of the Fryrish. It was honestly a really tight toss-up as to whether this would land at the number 1 and number 2 spot, and for good reason. This episode is perfection. The first to utilize flashbacks to Fry's time in the 90s, this one introduces Fry's brother and establishes their lifelong rivalry, and how that rivalry bleeds over into the future. When Fry goes to his old house to retrieve his lucky 7-leaf clover, he discovers that his brother has stolen it alongside Fry's identity, becoming the first human to walk on Mars, which was Fry's lifelong dream. The episode brilliantly sets up Fry and Yancey's rivalry through these flashbacks, showing that Yancey was constantly stealing Fry's thunder.
The robot! The robot? That's similar to mine!
And to the audience, we are empathizing with Fry, seeing that Yancey was treating him poorly, stealing his ideas, and constantly trying to steal his lucky 7-leaf clover. We even get a flashback where we see him discover the clover where Fry hid it, in the Breakfast Club soundtrack, also pocketing a drawing Fry made showing him in space. All of the clues point to Yancey stealing Fry's dream. But the end of the episode is the greatest, most emotional gut punch in the entire series, and one of my favorite moments in all of television history. As Fry goes to dig up his old 7-leaf clover from Yancey's grave, he reads the gravestone and learns the truth. Yancey didn't steal Fry's identity, he named his son Philip in honor of his lost brother.
Who I miss every day. I love you, Philip.
This beautifully recontextualizes everything we saw before. Yancey didn't steal Fry's clover or drawing because he wanted to steal his dreams. He did it because he missed his brother dearly, and he regretted the way he treated him growing up. This episode is an absolute masterclass in storytelling. It's funny, heartfelt, subversive, and surprising. I truly believe it's one of the greatest episodes of television in all of history, and I'll never, ever get over this final line.
Here lies Philip J. Fry, named for his uncle, to carry on his spirit.
Just beautiful. All right, drum roll for the number 1 episode in Futurama history.
What? Why are you cutting to me?
Number 1, The Sting. This is an episode that I've always loved, but over time it's just continuously moved up my list further and further until it found itself at the very top spot. I think when it comes down to these top 3 episodes here, it's mostly a matter of taste. I can't say that The Sting is better than The Luck of the Fryrish or Devil's Hands. I think all 3 are basically equally great, but The Sting speaks to my personal sensibilities so beautifully. When the Planet Express crew goes to collect space honey from a space bee colony, a bee attacks Leela. Fry jumps in front of Leela to save her and dies in the process. The rest of the episode can only be described as a fever dream, as Leela copes with the loss of Fry and struggles to differentiate dreams from reality. There are so many incredibly creative and beautiful sequences in this, particularly when Leela's dreams are taking over her mind. These are the things that I think puts this episode at number 1 for me, with my personal sensibilities really appreciating the trippy, reality-bending aspects of the episode. Whenever Leela dreams of Fry, he is 1, attempting to give her some kind of gift, and 2, ends the sequence by begging her to wake up, which jolts Leela awake, disappointed that she was only dreaming of Fry. Leela also continues to eat royal space honey to help her sleep, though the professor warns her that eating too much will put her in a permanent slumber. The major twist is of course that Leela was actually the one who took the space bee's venom during the initial attack, and the entire episode was her own coma dream. But the way this recontextualizes everything we saw in the episode is absolutely brilliant, as we learn that Fry sat by her side the entire time. The little toy that he gave her in the dream, he actually brought it to her in the hospital. You can see it on her nightstand. When he gave her his jacket, he really put his jacket over her in the hospital bed. Their adventure via sleigh through the ice fields, that location was on the television in her hospital room. And Fry asking her to wake up, that was literally Fry begging Leela to wake up from her coma. But I think the even darker implication is the space honey. As Leela became more and more confused trying to understand her dreams from reality, she nearly eats enough space honey to put her into a permanent sleep, believing it's the only way she can be with Fry again, in her dreams. But I believe this represents Leela giving up the fight to wake from her coma. If Leela had eaten that last spoonful of honey, I'm pretty sure she would have died. I think this is not only one of the best episodes of television ever made, but easily the most rewarding Futurama episode to rewatch. I continue to catch new genius details even years later, and I'll never get over how surprising and well crafted this story is. It's absolutely incredible, and it's my favorite episode of Futurama.
I thought maybe if you heard a familiar voice, it might help keep your mind together. But who knows if it really got through.
It got through, Fry. It got through.
Holy shit, folks. We did it. Every Futurama ranked. I want to give a huge shout out to my guests, Toonrific Tariq, Hats Off Media, and Offbeat Kiki. Y'all are the best. And an equally big thanks to the editors who helped me put this absolute monster together. Joe Murphy, The Wacky Deli, Josh S., and Toonrific Tariq. I have no idea if I'm ever going to do another ranking video like this, but drop what shows you most want to see me rank in the comments, and I will definitely consider it. Alright, that's it.
I'm gonna go lie down.
Two cellos.